Good evening, everybody. Now, tonight we have an extraordinary guest with us. Many of you have requested his presence on here. In my opinion, he is one of the brightest minds to come out of the United States of America, and for a country that has produced some of the brightest minds in the world, that is something else. I'm going to put him on screen now. And Dr. Shiva, you are now live from Camelot Castle. A very, very warm welcome to you. I have been sent your videos from all over the world, and as a student of meme velocity, I have to tell you that your meme velocity at the moment is higher than probably anybody else's on planet Earth. Welcome. And lovely.
Nice to be here. Thanks,
Perhaps
John.
we could just sort of start. You're with friends. I just want to sort of say a quick disclaimer. I am not a doctor. This channel is not making any medical recommendations or advising anybody to do anything medically. We advise everybody to stick to the law of the country that they're living in. You have some extraordinary views, and we are champions of freedom of speech. So you're with friends. We would love you to just let us know, how did it get started for you, and what is the sort of the genesis of what is occurring with what I would call now is the sort of the Shiva senatorial movement.
Well, thank you, John. It's a great honor to be here. I'm glad I'm among friends, so I'll speak freely, and hopefully we'll have a good conversation here. I notice a lot of people are joining. I'm seeing a bunch of chat messages coming in.
Well, we are joined from Blenheim Palace by His Grace the Duke of Marlborough, and who is a great fan of yours, and who asked me specifically to get you on here, and is very interested to hear about your senatorial bid. We're also joined, funnily enough, by Kirstie Alley, who is also another big.
Oh, okay, great. Hi, Kirstie. How are you?
And she is a great friend of yours, and a number of other people who I'll get to. But let me allow you to talk.
Yeah, so first of all, my great appreciation to the Duke of Marlborough for sharing the videos and allowing me to come here today. So I thought I'll do two pieces, John. First is you asked two questions, what brought me here? And then essentially, what's happening right now? And both of those to me are intimately connected. And I think what's extraordinary is, I really believe there's timing, and so a gateway has opened up in many ways, I think, for everyone in the world in an extraordinary way. But in some ways, that gateway has been this arc of a journey that my life has gone through for the last 56 years. So I find it sort of very magical in some ways that it brings me to this point. And I think a little bit of that background would probably be helpful to everyone. I had a childhood that was really in two parts, one in the East and one in the West. And so the Eastern part of me was, brought up in India. And even within India, I had sort of an East and West within India, if that makes any sense, because I grew up in Bombay, which is sort of New York on steroids in some sense. And then I grew up in a small.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So most, young people who grow up in India today in the city, they sort of, shun themselves from even going into the village. But the other part of my life was, taking the old sort of Western type caboose trains with coal down to the deep South Indian village where my grandparents lived with no running water, no electricity. I would take that train, and then my grandfather would pick me up on a bullock cart, and then we'd go from the train into this village, which had all dirt. There was no paved roads, but it was an extraordinary experience for me because it's where I think I really developed everything I have today, which is this deep appreciation for nature, this deep love for people who worked with nature and who essentially had a different way of looking at life. And that was about this connection to the earth and this connection to health. So where I got politicized. You see, I grew up in India, which had a caste system. And in that caste system, which was frankly not a real thing, it was essentially imposed on people there's a long history too, but fundamentally, we were considered untouchables, which was essentially a model of being, which really didn't suit. It was basically slavery in some sense, right? And I think we come back to that point over and over in history: freedom versus slavery, freedom versus slavery. And it's a very interesting inflection point we're at today. But in that condition, I was very interested in understanding politics. Why was there this difference? In fact, one of my earliest memories as a 4-year-old child was playing with a young boy, and I went over to his house, and his mother did not allow me to come into the house, gave me water in a different cup. And that's when I realized I was deeply hurt, still to this day. And I remember going and asking my mom, and she said, "Oh yeah, we're Shudras." She said, "When I used to go to the well, they used to shoo me away like a pig." So that was deeply moving because it wanted me to understand politics. So I started reading politics when I was 4, 5, 6 years old. Revolutionary politics, left wing, right wing, all sorts of politics. I was very interested in it. But the other part of my life was the fact that my grandmother and grandparents and my great-grandfather, I remember very well, who was an indentured servant, went to Burma, came back. But my grandparents were very interesting people. I grew up in a household in that village where my grandmother would channel spirits. Okay, she was a village healer. In her home were all the great deities from Jesus Christ to Rama and Vishnu and all these, in the small home. And then she would teach me as I lied in her lap as a kid. She would recite great epic stories of Rama and Shiva and Jesus. I mean, these epic stories that were extraordinary, but it was always good versus evil and about the struggle of honor and nobility, like the Knights of the Round Table, that kind of thing, But it was, looking back, I think it instilled in me this deep sense of love and courage and what I appreciated about being human. But in their own lives, my grandparents were poor village farmers. They'd grow rice and cotton 16 hours a day. I remember my great-grandfather coming home with leeches on his legs, but he was an extraordinary man. He would, until he died when he was 100 some odd, out in the fields working, ripped, muscularly. But he lived a very simple life. He'd go to bed on a very small plank. This is my great-grandfather. In the morning, he'd get up at 4 a.m, make a drink, which was from the previous rice, which was essentially, looking back, was, filled with B vitamins, what you would support the microbiome. Then he'd go work and come home. So it was a very different life. But what I learned was this deep connection to spirit. And I also saw this woman, my grandmother, with tattoos all over her arms, chewed tobacco leaf. As I mentioned, she would do, prayers every morning. But in the weekends, she was a village healer. She was a shaman. So people would come to her home with great respect. She would never charge them anything. And she would observe their face, and she would figure out what was their particular, in retrospect, I can talk about it from a systems scientist, their particular body state, and then figure out their dysfunctions. And then she would figure out the particular herbs to give them. Sometimes it was massage. Sometimes it was a mantra. It was different modalities, and was the right medicine for the right person at the right time. So I saw her empirically heal lots of people. So that motivated me in a deep, deep love for that system of medicine, how this woman was able to do this, who, there was no white jacket, there was no ego, but an extraordinary connection to want to help people. In fact, willingness to help. Yeah, and many, many years later, when one of my uncles who got, both my parents were extraordinary people. Also, my mother came from a broken home. The father had left her, ran off with somebody, which was unheard of in India. And my dad had grown up in war-torn Burma and came back to India as a 12-year-old, never had seen a book. He learned to read and write and everything under a mango tree. And then he became an engineer, extraordinary human being. And my mom ended up becoming a mathematician. So the fact that they made it from that was two very interesting human beings who met and then, gave rise to my sister and I. So I think I was very, very fortunate. My parents were incredible people of tremendous will, particularly my mother, and had a deep, deep sense of justice. She was very cut and dry. She could look at someone, assess them very quickly. She was very blunt with her tongue, but she really had this deep sense of what was right or wrong. So when we came to the United States, when I was a 7-year-old kid, it was this journey that brought us here. I remember when I came to New Jersey, in those days, it was like a 48-hour flight, right? It wasn't like a 12-hour flight.
That's a journey in those days, absolutely.
It was a long journey. My dad had actually come to the United States. We had to wait about a year, so we had to come here legally, and it was a great honor to come to the United States. So I remember I had shorts on. It was December 5th. I had left India on December 2nd, which was my 7th birthday, landed here on December 5th, and it was snowing, and I had shorts on. And a very nice family picked me up, and we got our clothes. My dad, I think, came here with $75. So we moved to Paterson, New Jersey. If anyone knows New Jersey, is one of the poorest cities, but my parents always were into education. So every year and a half, we kept moving. Paterson was a public school system. Then we moved to Clifton, which was more of a white working class neighborhood, Parsippany. And then we ended up the last 3 years in Livingston, which was an extremely wealthy, predominantly great people, Jewish neighborhood. And me and my sister were the 2 Indian kids among 4,000 kids. Wow. So that was my, and it was all public school systems. In fact, in that, I believe Ivanka or Donald, I think Jared Trump used to live in Livingston. So you can understand Paterson versus Livingston was like night and day. I remember going to Livingston and I felt, Jesus, these people are so wealthy. I almost felt I didn't fit in there, but I did quite well. By the time I was in 9th grade, I'd finished calculus and there was no other courses to offer in the high school. So my teachers were very concerned would I get bored. And my dear mom saw this little paper clipping about a opportunity that a professor, and this is quite fascinating, a professor at New York University, Henry Mullish, who just passed away, and I went to Israel and I did his memoriam there. But he had realized that sometime in the future, America would need software engineers. And so he had decided that he would invite 40 kids in a competitive process all across the United States to go to NYU. Now, the age cutoff, I think, had to be a junior, but I was only a freshman. So I applied anyway, and I was one of the 40 kids who got selected. And so we had to get to, if you've been to New York is very different than Newark. Newark versus New York. And my mom would drop me off at 5 a.m. at the train station, and I would take the train in. Now, the reason I share that is most parents are afraid to send their kids down the street these days. But I was a 14-year-old kid going on my own into New York. And I arrived there at 6 a.m., 7 a.m. and work until 8 p.m. studying 7 computer languages. And this was at the Courant Institute of Mathematical Sciences, one of the #1 mathematical sciences, institutes in the world. Learned 7 programming languages, John. This is in 78 when computers were the size of, 10, 20 rooms.
Because as I remember, we didn't really know which language was going to take off, did we?
No, we didn't. There was languages like, there's languages like COBOL and Fortran and Snowball. In fact, interestingly enough, the governor of New Jersey here just put out a notice. He goes, does anyone know COBOL programming? Because all the employment that they do payroll had broken down and they were looking for programmers. I could have helped them. But anyway, it was these old computer languages, which I learned. And then after that, I still had high school classes left to do. And in Newark, New Jersey, which is predominantly African-American, was a small medical college. And through my mom and another teacher, arrangements were made that I would get a job there. In fact, a full-time job, John, as a 14-year-old kid, to be a research fellow doing medical research. Because remember, my interest in medicine, but you got to understand, I wasn't just a nerd. I played what you would call football and baseball. I mowed lawns. I painted, so I was typically a working class kid, but I had this extraordinary opportunity as a 14-year-old kid to travel 30 miles. And this was all brought to you by women, meaning my grandmother inspired me, my mother. And there was an extraordinary woman in that high school who fought with the administration. These were revolutionaries in many ways, fought so this 14-year-old kid could leave high school and have a full-time job as a research fellow. And what was my job? I started doing research on understanding why babies were dying in their sleep, which we today call SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. That medical college had some of the best sleep data and went in apnea when the baby would stop breathing. So I started analyzing that data using what you would call very sophisticated algorithms, which probably people in PhD work would develop. And I later on went on to publish a paper. So that taught me, how to using computers in medicine, John, and systems, and biology, which I got fascinated by. But the other thing that happened, John, I also got deeply into large scale systems, because in that medical college, many people may know who are over the age of 40, I'm sure, whether it was the office of the prime minister or medical college, the way that systems worked of communication, that we had the old fashioned phone, but there was another system for collaboration, which many young people may not know. It was called the interoffice mail system. And that was a way people communicated. And it was a very sophisticated system. Always the secretary was a unit of communication in all these offices. She had a desktop, an inbox and outbox folders, the drafts folder, paper clips, the proverbial typewriter, where she would write a memo. And these were very important communications because you would write a memo if we were going to hire someone, a contract, at a very typical structure, to, from, subject. You used a carbon paper to make carbon copies. First, people would come up and they pick up the mail. They had pneumatic tubes. You had registered mail. It was a complex system. And I was asked to convert that entire system to the electronic version. And I wrote 50,000 lines of code in a language called Fortran, which is for formula translation, in 8K of memory. So I had to write all the memory management, learned an incredible amount. Now you have to understand, in that environment were people 30, 40, 50, 60 years older than me. I mean, some people were 70 years old, and they treated me as an equal, John. One of the things Dr. Les Michelson was my mentor, who's still there, is the head of high performance computing. He said, Shiva, I know you're bright, but I'm going to treat you like an adult. And all I ask is that you be a professional. So I would show up with my briefcase. I would work hard. I would leave. I would file my reports. And it was a tremendous experience. I used to work sometimes 2 a.m. But in that small medical college in Newark, New Jersey, which is still one of the poorest cities in the United States, I created email. I wrote all the code, all the features, named it email, John, a term that would never have been used before in the English language.
So you came up with the name email.
I also and wrote all the code with capturing all those features. We're not talking about simple text messaging, okay? So I captured
already that we have on Camelot Castle TV tonight, the man that invented email. I mean, it's unbelievable. But this is continue. This is
yes. So John, the reason I'm sharing this is, but that taught me about systems. You see,
yeah.
But email is not the simple exchange of text messages,
no.
Which is what people in the military were working on. But they thought, in fact, there's a document when all the quote unquote controversy came out, which I'll come to. But the issue was they didn't think email was possible. You know, the conversion of this entire
remember that debate very well.
Yeah. So remember, we're talking about the entire system, and this is why the word system, when we come to the immune system, we talk about, is so important. A system is not just a reductionist thing of simply exchanging text messages from point A to point B. That's electronic messaging. That goes back to Samuel Morse. I'm talking about this very complex system: inbox, outbox, folders, the procedures, carbon copy. I converted that entire system, which, by the way, the military and the people, the contemporaries who were 50, 60 years older, thought it was impossible. Why did they think it was impossible? In fact, there's a document we found many years later, written by the Rand Corporation, which said, you know, the conversion of the interoffice mail system is an impossible task. I'm paraphrasing it, but they use the word impossible because you're talking about diverse users and diverse needs. You know what they were talking about? They were talking about they were the white lab coat scientists of the elite, and there's no way a secretary could move from the typewriter to the keyboard. Remember, in those days, it was very segregated who used the computer. The thought of a secretary moving from the typewriter to the keyboard was an extraordinary leap. And especially, they were not going to move unless you had all these components. I remember the secretary saying, it's got to have the inbox, it's got to have the outbox, it's got to have, right? Because they were moving from one metaphor into a different digital metaphor. So that's what I created. In fact, so 1981, when I came to MIT, MIT had its official newspaper. 1,040 students entered into the class of 1981. And in the front page of the newspaper, they highlighted 3 kids out of the 1,040. It's pretty hard to get into MIT. And I remember reading it, and I was one of the kids highlighted for creating this email system. Now, I was brought up to always be a humble Indian kid. I didn't call up my PR friends and say, look, let's let the world know that I invented email. But that winter of 81, I was elected student body president. I was always very interested in politics and activism. And I went to the president's home. At that time, it was Paul Gray, who was the science advisor at Ronald Reagan. And he said, Shiva, you know, it's unfortunate that the United States Supreme Court does not accept software patents. And this is also interesting when we talk about politics. The legislators, the typical lawyers and lobbyists, were always 15, 20 years behind the development of technology. That's why when Zuckerberg, you saw him go to the Senate, none of those guys really knew how to grill him.
No.
So the same thing had occurred with software. In 1976 or 78, when I invented email, no one knew what software was. They thought it was, you were writing something, right? You didn't see anything physical like a computer or a stapler or a machine being created. It was all in the ether. So it was in 1980, which I didn't know, the United States had changed the Copyright Act of 1976 amended it to become the Software Act of 1980, Computer Act of 1980, which said that you could use copyright law to protect software inventions. So Dr. Gray said, Shiva, you should apply for the copyright. So that was the only way to protect software inventions for software inventors. It wasn't simply putting a C with a copyright. You had to send all your code in, back and forth. My parents weren't lawyers like Bill Gates' lawyers. I did it on my own. There was no internet. You had to write back for all of these forms. I had to talk to the Copyright Office. And on August 30th, 1982, I was issued the official copyright for email, recognizing me as the inventor of email. And remember, that was the only way to protect software invention. So I wrote the code, all the features, it was used, called it email, and got the first copyright. There's no controversy here at all. And I'll come back to it, which is part of the journey, but I forgot about that because remember, my interest was always in medicine. So when I came to MIT, I was deeply interested in medicine, pursued the pre-med program, but something in me, John, deep down in me, would not allow me to go to medical school. It was like something was off in the way that medicine itself was practiced, unfortunately. So I ended up going in and out of MIT, did multiple degrees in engineering, in electrical engineering, but always one foot in the real world. Would start a company or be part of a startup. Started one of the earliest companies to do a predecessor to PowerPoint. We sold it to IBM. Came back to MIT because of my love of art. I did a degree in visual design at the MIT Media Lab. I still love art, graphic design. I have a real appreciation for that. And then ended up doing another master's in mechanical engineering. And that was around 1993. And who was in office in the United States was Bill Clinton. And if you remember, email, its journey was it was really an office application. A lot of people don't know you don't need the internet to run email. Remember, we used to use it in local area networks. But in 1993, something extraordinary happened. The World Wide Web came. And when the World Wide Web came, it took the internet to a consumer application. And in 1993, I had started a company to help artists go online because I really believed that artists were getting screwed in terms of gatekeepers. And I thought there was a way to go direct. So I had started that company while at MIT. And something interesting happened. The White House now is starting to get lots and lots of email, 5,000, 10,000 emails and doubling. And so the White House runs the competition. I'm a graduate student at MIT, a PhD student, doing research on analysis of patterns, speech patterns. I was motivated by this because I remember my grandmother looking at patterns of the face and predicting. So I was building a very interesting system to analyze all types of patterns. Well, the White House has a contest to see if you could automatically read an email, the patterns in an email, and categorize it for Clinton's office. And I was the only graduate student asked to participate because people had heard of my MIT research with 4 or 5 other companies. And I ended up winning that contest. Wow. And I ended up, so here's the thing. It was heading towards medicine again, research, and email would always pull me off. So this was my second life with email. I left MIT. I was only going to do this for 2 years. I ended up spending 10 years. And I started a company for email analysis and how to analyze email. We grew that to a pretty sizable company. Pretty much every major Fortune 1000 company, if you send an email to Nike, our technology would read the email, analyze the patterns, bucket it, reduce the cost of customer service, develop data. But one of the things I learned with that was how massive corporations were very interested in observing their consumers and then controlling them. Observability and controllability. This is one of the things that some will come back to. But the ability to observe what people are doing in mass and then being able to send a message to control them is really control systems theory. So if you think about it, this is why China has 200 million cameras everywhere and is starting to look at people's mouths, because once you can capture data, you can start observing people in mass, and then you can start putting outputs to manipulate people in mass. But for me, it was interesting. I remember one day watching all these emails come in from Nike. And I had realized that an ad campaign would go out on traditional advertising and people would write back, John, in extraordinary similar ways. You could almost bucket people. And then as a result of that, I built I was awarded 3 US patents for email and analysis. Okay. So that ended up being a company. And then as when that company was growing, it was becoming basically lots of people. We did it very well. I was walking back to MIT. This was now 2003, 10 years after I left in the middle of the PhD program. And my old advisor, Forbes said, Shiva, what are you doing? You got to come back to MIT And he said there's a new field developing that will really take your love of computing and your love of medicine. And that's where it brings us to our conversation today, was a new field called systems biology.
Yeah.
That was in 2003. And systems biology basically recognized, because in 2003, something extraordinary happened to everyone listening, is that, remember in 1993, we started sequencing the human genome. We wanted to find out all the genes in the genome. We knew in 1993 a worm had around 20,000 genes, right? You know, a gene, by the way, is all the elements of, you know, I got to do one thing, John. I'm just going to grab my connector. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, no problem.
Quite an incredible response.
Incredible.
So far.
Sorry about that.
And thank you everybody for joining us. We're here live in Camelot with Dr. Shiva. Dr. Shiva is with us.
Yes.
Yeah. So 1993, something quite extraordinary happened. Is that when the Genome Project started, the notion was, could we map out the entire human genome? We knew a worm had 20,000 genes. So let's talk about this, because this a lot of the things I'm laying down here is because I want to teach people some of the concepts here, John.
By the way, you're doing brilliantly.
Okay.
And your audience is among some of the most intelligent people in England and the United States.
Oh, wonderful.
And joined by Dr. Naputi, who is this doctor. He's got about, his last videos had about 23 million views or something.
Wow.
And he's just shared the stream. So he says hello. He wants to hook up with you and support you in your goals. Number of people saying we want to support you for the Senate. So keep going. You're not limited by time. We've got all the time in the world. We're all under house arrest here in England. So
okay.
Keep going.
So you have to understand. So one of the phenomenon that science has always grappled with, or for that matter, thinking, is the concept of reductionism versus what we call a systems approach to looking at things, or some people may call it holism. I rather use the word systems approach. So this goes back to the very interesting parable. If you remember, Buddha tells a story of the king who calls the 6 blind men into his court, and he brings an elephant in, and each of the 6 men are blind, and he asks them to touch different parts of an elephant's body. And so the person who touches a tusk thinks, it's a spear. The person who touches a tail thinks it's a brush. The person who bumps into the feet thinks it's an oak tree, and so on. So each one of those individuals, they don't see the elephant, but they have a blinded view of reality. So this is probably the best way you can look at reductionism. Reductionism is you don't see the whole, but you get a blinded view of reality. If you were ever to put all of it together, you would get something that does not look anywhere near the elephant. So that's one of the important things that needs to be understood we have a couple of puppies here. That needs to be
well, they're fine.
This needs to be understood from what is reductionism. So in 1993, when the Genome Project starts, the reductionist thinking of biologists, biologists get paid and they get a lot of accolades if they take a very complex system and understand one little part of it, right? So for example, if they find how two proteins interact, you can win a Nobel Prize, or if you crystallize a protein. But they're not really incentivized to understand the whole elephant, right? That's not the incentive. The incentive is to find one little thing. So when the Genome Project started, the reductionist notion was that complexity of an organism must be correlated to the number of parts. More parts, more complexity. Does that make sense? So,
makes sense.
Right. So we knew we had 20,000 genes in a worm. So the thought was, well, a human being must have at least 1 million genes, not just, 100,000 genes or 20, but 1 million genes. So that led into this march of finding those 500,000 or 1 million genes. And as you see the Genome Project proceed, over time, they find less and less genes. Their estimates keep changing: 100,000, 80,000, 50,000, 30,000, and eventually 20,000. So we only have around 20,000 protein coding genes, which is the same number of genes as what we have in a worm. So this was an extraordinary irony in biology, because they realized, wait a minute, we have the same number of genes as a worm. How could we be such more of a complex creature? And that made people understand that it's not the number of genes, It's the interconnections between a system. So if I gave you 100 balls, you could line them up one after the other. That could be one conformation, right? A very simple conformation. Or you could, connect them in very complex ways. So same number of balls, but two very different complex conformations. So what people realize, it's not the genes, but the genes create proteins. The proteins fold back on themselves. They interact. So you create very complex choreographies, which makes us versus a worm what it is. So this led into a field saying we need to go to systems biology. We need to understand the interconnections among objects. And that is when I came back to MIT, because the National Science Foundation in 1993 put forward an extraordinary grand challenge, which was, could somebody mathematically model the whole human cell on the computer? And the notion was, if you think about us in one characteristic, right, from a physical world, separate from the spiritual aspects, as a big factory of chemical reactions interacting together, millions of chemical reactions in time changing. And so the goal was, could you mathematically model that? For that matter, could you do it in a cell, modeling a cell? So I said, wow, this is a cool problem. It was considered an intractable and impossible problem. And you have to understand how people even looked at this problem. The head of the MIT Department of Biological Engineering, Doug Laufenberger, was leaving the field because he was maybe able to model and interconnect around 50 reactions. Old chemistry, sodium plus chloride equals sodium chloride, interconnections of those. But when I looked at this problem, I didn't look at it as a biologist or a chemist. I saw it as a engineering systems problem. What I saw was, because I'd worked in industry, I said, what we really have here is you have millions of labs all over the world. A biologist is really a knowledge engineer. A biologist is working on a problem, and they're in a very narrow way with their microscopes, whatever they're using, and they're working on a particular problem, and they're doing some type of lab experiment with the wet world, with the world of atoms, where they're doing some experiment, and out of that experimentation, they may find some interesting phenomenon. A reacts with B to get C to D, and they'll publish that in a paper. So I said, look, we have millions of people all over the world publishing every day. They're publishing little pieces, little Lego pieces. They're not incentivized to put it together. So imagine if I could create a system in any field, cancer, Alzheimer's, brain health, and we'll talk about it, in the area of psychiatry, everything's about always giving people drugs, Adderall or Ritalin. But imagine if you could understand these chemicals. What's that?
We're not that keen on the drugging of the children.
Exactly, but that's what the pharmaceutical industry is. They basically create drugs, and the way they create it, I'll talk about, is done in a very, very medieval manner. It's quite horrible, actually. But the idea was, if you could model these chemical reactions in silico, not in vitro, which is in a test tube, or in vivo, killing animals and killing people. If you could do it on the computer, this is how we build airplanes, right? We don't just throw test pilots in. We don't go hurt animals. We do everything on the computer. We figure out all of Bernoulli's equation, and then we go down the path of, doing something in a wind tunnel. So that became the love of my discovery process from 2003 to 2007. And I created a technology called Cyto, which meant cell, solve. Cytosolve. And in fact, there were members of my PhD committee didn't think this was possible. Anyway, I did it. And I created a very powerful way to take any field of science. Let's say you take osteoarthritis or some aspect. There's 20,000 papers written there, which are all those little people in their little narrow reductionist way publishing it. I could extract those papers, find all those little chemical reactions, put them into mathematical models, but not monolithically, because it becomes intractable. Decentralize it, John, and that's one of the things we need to talk about. Real solutions come when we take a systems approach and we decentralize, not top down. When we try to do things, this is something, a phenomenological thing that we need to understand. Historically, the fascist model, that's fascism, I forget the gentleman who advised Mussolini, his model of the body was a centralized control system which told everything what to do. In fact, that's not how biology is. It's actually 6 trillion cells which self-organize to create us. It's bottoms up, actually. It's not top down. So
just to stop you here, we have a very good friend who I will hope to introduce you to, who is called Bob Duggan, who is one of the great pharmaceutical entrepreneurs in America. And funnily enough, he also helped with the founding of the internet. And he recently took his company public for about 3.6 billion. He, I think, would love what it is that you're talking about. But remind me afterwards to.
I'll do that, Bob. Okay.
Yeah.
So the idea here was we created a way, a platform that we could decentralize knowledge development and aggregation. And so we could take a field, we could extract, integrate, and mathematically model, but not statistically. You see, the problem with statistics, you can lie. Okay, that's what happens with, you send an input in, you get an output, and you fit a line to a curve. And we'll talk about that. This was mechanistic. This was actually looking at all the causal relationships. So that Cytosol became that platform. And that's what I did for my thesis in 2007. And I was under a lot of pressure to go start a business because it's quite an extraordinary technology. Wrote a lot of papers I'll come back to. But what I did, John, was after 2007, I took 2 years off, and I wanted to now, in honor to my grandparents, I said, let me go now. I have all this knowledge. I have all the credentials, the 4 degrees from MIT. No one could say I'm some woo-woo guy, some, off in the fringe guy. I said, why don't I use this knowledge to go understand how those Eastern systems of medicine worked, how my grandmother did that. So I applied for a Fulbright, and I was very pleasantly surprised they gave me it. And on the front page of the MIT newspaper again, just as I came in, was this article with a big picture of me in front of the MIT dome, and it said, armed with 4 degrees, Shiva Idre heads back to India to study Eastern medicine. So they were sort of interested. Why would a guy who could, do anything want to go back to India? So that's what I did. So 2007 to around 9, I went back to India, and I was trying to, I relearned the Indian systems of medicine, and I was trying to understand, they use words. Some of you may know Vata, Pitta, Kapha, Karma, Prakriti, earth, water, fire, all these words. And the Westerner looks at it and they scoff at it. This is nonsense. These people don't know what they're doing. They must be indigenous tribes people. Right? That's typically the reaction. But the big aha moment I had, John, was remember
Camelot was saying, we believe that the West has a huge spiritual debt to India, actually, because India kept alive the concept of immortality for centuries and centuries and centuries. So it's my view that there's actually a huge spiritual debt to India, and it's amazing that you've done this. Continue. I just wanted to say that.
Yeah. So thanks for sharing that, because there are two systems of medicine in India. One is called Siddha, Siddha, and the other is called Ayurveda. Now, if you actually look at the original history of India, the original people of India, just like you had the Native Americans in the United States, were called Dravidians. And there's some, we can get into some historical controversy, but by and large, they were the indigenous people, and they practiced Shaiva Siddhanta, which was, there's the mythology goes that there is Shiva, and the way medicine came to being was Shiva passed on the knowledge of medicine to his wife Parvati, and Parvati gave it to their son Karthikeyan. You've seen the one god Ganesha, but people always forget the other child of Shiva and Parvati who's called Murugan or Karthikeyan. He is known as
Ganesh is one of my favorites.
Yeah, so Ganesh is one god, but Karthikeyan is the other deity. They're brothers. But Karthikeyan in many ways resembles the archangel Michael in the Christian tradition. If you remember, Michael is the warrior who chases Lucifer and the devil out, and the devil's out of God's kingdom. And he's also known as
Camelot Castle sits on the St. Michael line, which is this ley line that runs through Europe.
I say, wow.
You are talking a few meters away from the St. Michael line. So perhaps he's with us this evening.
So the archangel Michael in that archetype had the attributes of the warrior and also the attributes of the healer, where you pray to Michael for healing. Well, Murugan in the Indian, and by the way, they have both. In the Christian tradition, Archangel Michael has a peacock feathers that as the angel. Well, in the Indian tradition, Murugan also his familiar, he rides the peacock, and he's known as a god of war. But Parvati gave the knowledge of medicine to Murugan, who then passed it on to the first Siddhar, who was a saint, who wrote down all the knowledge in old papyrus leaves. Siddhar, which comes from Siddhartha, which means the enlightened ones. And the Siddhars developed 5 systems of their 5 branches of medicine. One was martial arts. And if you look at the history, the martial arts of the world came from South India. The other was the use of heavy metals, nanoparticles of heavy metals coming from natural products through bhasmas. The third was what you today call yoga, the practice of yoga. The other one was, the yoga postures and stretches. The other one was meditation. And the last one was the use of herbs. Now, the Siddhars believed that not only was it important to achieve spiritual immortality, but also physical. And they believed that was possible, that you could have, and in fact, that was one of the duties of human life, was to achieve immortality. So they had that embedded into the knowledge of Siddha. So in fact, today, in these palm leaf manuscripts are written all this ancient knowledge. So when I went back, and by the way, all of these recently were put into a center. And by the way, because of the corruption in India at that time, hopefully Modi will change it. Very little got done with that. So when I went to India, I was trying to understand the system of medicine. As I mentioned, they use very interesting language, a different language. But the aha moment I had, John, was I realized that the language that they were using to understand the body, by the way, unfortunately, over the last 400 years, people do still practice these medical systems. In fact, it's a government ministry that reports up to the prime minister called Ayush. However, many of them, if you ask them, well, explain what Vata, Pitta, Kapha is, explain these, they can't explain it. So the Western medical person looks at it and says, this must be BS, right? So what I was able to understand, John, was those systems and the language that they were using matched one-to-one with what I call Western control systems theory, how we build airplanes, the whole concept of general systems theory. So I made that connection. It was almost a Rosetta Stone I'd discovered, John. And the Rosetta Stone connected this Eastern system of medicine to not Western medicine, but engineering systems theory, control systems theory. And when I got back to the United States, and by the way, before coming back to India, I was recruited by the Prime Minister of India to run one of the largest innovation centers. They said, why are you going back? India is your motherland. Why don't you help? And so I did a stint there where I wrote, where I was brought in as the first outstanding scientist technologist of Indian origin. I said, let me give back to my motherland. And in 6 months, John, I figured out a whole mapping for the largest scientific institution in India, how to move them into the area of innovation, because the Indian public was attacking the government saying, we spent billions with you, where are all the Indian innovators? But in 6 months, I realized there was massive corruption in that institution. And I wrote a paper which said, this is a way forward, that got released to the press. In fact, I think you said your friend at Hindustan Times, because I was under massive attack. I think he's watching. I was under massive attack for writing that, but it got released to the press. Within 3 hours, I was fired, threatened, death threats, and I had to leave India at night all the way up to the border of Nepal, crossed over to Kathmandu. It's a story I haven't shared, and came back to the United States. And Nature Journal had me write an article on, hey, what's going on with India? Amazing people. How come there's no innovators coming from below? In fact, India never produced one Nobel Prize scientist within India. Gobind Khurana couldn't even get a lecturer job in India. He had to leave to come to America, and he won the Nobel Prize in medicine. And what I saw...
Yes, sorry.
In fact, India had two Nobel Prize winners during colonialism, but none post-independence. And what you find is it was basically a feudalism that had come into India and a nepotism which suppressed Indian innovation. So amazing people, but people had to leave to have that freedom. So the article I wrote, John, was called Innovation Demands Freedom, Why America Innovates and India May Never. It was published in Nature. And I exposed all the corruption, how buildings were being burned down, the embezzlement I observed. That paper, the Prime Minister of India, which is from the Gandhi family, Manmohan Singh's office, threatened the editor of Nature India, and she pulled it down. Okay. Wow. I went through that journey before I came back to the United States. Anyway, when I get back to the United States, the head of the MIT department said, Shiva, I said, look, I want to offer a lecture series within the umbrella of MIT that would link Eastern medicine with Western systems theory. And so, John, I would have on Thursday nights, it was a 3-hour lecture course for 13 weeks. 300, 200 people would show up. On the one hand side would sit the doctors, the engineers in their suits and ties. On the other hand were what you would call the woo-woo people, right? The new age people, the yoga people, the acupuncturists, the chiropractors, who were always felt never understood by these people. But within a few short hours, I was able to share with them a very different language, not integrative medicine, but true engineering approach. And then I would talk about the Eastern and Western systems of medicine, show how they melded. And that ended up becoming a course I built called Systems Health, and an institute that, you know, I'm offering as a part of my campaign to teach people how to understand the body as a system.
Because
so that,
sorry, because as I understand it, I just, you know, I'm mindful that there's a lot of, I've been seeing a lot of the questions on here that are coming up, and people are absolutely fascinated by this. And Kirstie Alley is on the edge of her seat.
I say.
The situation is that, listen, I consider myself to be a relatively intelligent person, but listening to you, I realize that I'm barely educated. And you are clearly somebody with an extraordinary intellect. And, you know, we find ourselves today, on this planet, we're at a crossroads. We're actually sitting on a precipice. And we're either going to fall into the abyss because of the current situation, or we are going to enter a golden age. And, you know, those are your words, and I'm afraid I've plagiarized from you this afternoon. So please don't give me credit for that, anybody. Those are actually your words. Could you tell us, what is your take on the current situation? Because in this country, in England, a lot of people are not happy at all with how our government is handling things. And I've seen some of your videos from the United States, but don't assume that anybody else has seen it here. In my mind, there's no question that we need to help you get into the Senate. And we are going to already, there's a number of people here on the feed that have said they'd like to help you do that. Could you just tell us, you know, where are we now? What do you see is going on? And please don't pull any punches. You know, just tell us how you see the existing situation. Where are we now? And
yeah. Well, John, anyway, I mean, it's interesting. Your place is called Camelot. I think we need to rebuild the Knights of the Round Table, if you want to put it in a very simple way.
You are definitely qualify, and both spiritually and in terms of your medical achievements. And you know, the round table clearly needs a good doctor. So, you know, you definitely qualify, and it's a great honor to have you here. But continue.
So I say that because where we are right now, as I shared with you, is we're literally at this inflection point. And there was I forget the name of an extraordinary anthropologist who looked at many centuries. And he said that during the first 20 years, there's a very interesting pattern he saw of every century would be decided if that century heads into the dark age or the golden age. And we're literally, you know, sort of right in the middle of it. I think 8 more months to go in this this 2020. And the reason this is important, that's where we're at. So everyone, where we're at is we're at an inflection point, you know, where it can go into one type of system or another type of system. You can get into mathematics about it, but some people call it a fractal, where you come to a point where a certain perturbation can take it into one system or another system. But that's where we're at. The cool thing about this is it's not in someone else's hand. It's in our hands. It's what we decide to do. And if enough of us get it, a wave builds, and you can move an entire system of operation to a whole nother pattern of development, which we can call that the golden age, or to another pattern, which we call the dark age. Now, how do we get there? Well, you know, I'm finishing up a book. It's so busy, but it was a book that's been coming to me called The Climate of Science. It was sort of a play on the words of, you know, climate change. What is the actual climate of science? And one of the drawings I have in the book is that when you really look at it, you have this dynamic of power, profit, and control, or truth, freedom, and health. And that's the dynamic that's playing. And when technologies come, new technologies, it doesn't mean just because a technology comes, we're going to head into the golden age. Technology can be used for amazing good, but it can also be used for amazing evil. And what we're seeing, so for example, when the printing press came, right, it was supposed to be an extraordinary thing. We could all become the press. Well, what did it end up doing? We created 4 major publishers, and now you have the fake news media, right? We consolidated power. When the internet came, when I wrote the book, I don't have it here, called Arts and the Internet, the goal was, wow, it could be a revolution. But what has actually happened is Google, Facebook, few major telcos literally control all communication right now. In fact, you could argue that's even been more consolidated. We may be better off going to paper. Okay. So I want to talk about that. But where we are right now is, are we going to choose a path to truth, freedom, and health? Or are we going to succumb to power, profit, and control? So when you look at that, and if you look at, let's take the industry at hand here, which is big pharmaceuticals, big vaccine industry. What has been happening with that industry is that over the last 20, 30 years, I'm sure many people here, there's been an awakening taking place. 10% of the United States population does yoga, which means people are looking for other ways to take care of their body. I think Prince Charles is into Ayurveda, right? So the concept of people wanting to eat better, figure out what's right for their bodies, wanting to do organic. This was a phenomenon that has exploded. So that phenomenon of people wanting to understand what's right for them, wanting to take what they put into their bodies, has been also equally, in the Indian tradition, the Hindu tradition, they say this is the age of what they call the Kali Yuga, the age the world goes through different ages. In the Kali Yuga, the age of the earth is where you can have great enlightenment and you can have great darkness. Both are actually occurring at the same time. So in the midst of people wanting to get healthier and better, you also have the fact that pharmaceutical companies are actually failing. That's what's going on right now. They may be making trillions. They may have, it's $1 trillion industry, but the industry is actually failing. And that needs to be understood to understand where we are now. And what that means is it takes them 15 years to develop a drug. Those drugs have massive side effects. They have to go through a regulatory process. You or I can sue them. And that regulatory process means you test in a test tube, then you go kill animals, then you have to get allowance, and you go test on humans over many years, 15 years, and what comes out has side effects. And those side effects, even the FDA has recognized that even though pharma is spending more and more money in R&D, they're allowing less and less drugs, John. So we have to understand pharmaceutical companies, somehow they beef up their stock prices, but from a fundamental level, they're failing. So that's a phenomenon that's been going on, a multi-trillion-dollar industry that's literally burning in front of them. But over here is another industry for them, which is called vaccines. And that industry is unregulated in the sense it doesn't need to go through all those processes.
That's what I thought. Now, I should just let you know, Dr. Naputi has said that there are literally hundreds of doctors watching this stream right now.
Yeah.
Through his feed in America. So well done. And do tell us, because we are confronted, we're just the general public here. And even though I like to try and keep myself informed, it's very, very hard for us to try to understand what's going on. So do please continue. You're doing very good.
So what's going on is, from a pure capitalist perspective, there is an industry, and all of us knew when I was at MIT, my advisor, if you look at the presentations I make, it's basically showing how pharmaceutical companies spend year over year 30% in R&D, and they're finding less and less new drugs. It's not a good business model, and you can get sued. So their industry is actually failing. And if people, we can have a whole conversation on that, but trust me, the industry is failing. No matter how much it looks like it's succeeding, it's not. Over here in the United States, starting in 1962, the National Vaccine Act was put into place right after polio vaccine, before measles. And that act by John Kennedy was signed under the notion of an understanding of the immune system, which was very embryonic. But that notion was a very simplistic understanding of the immune system, which I can come back to in Q&A. But that was used to put together the National Vaccine Act. But by 1986, there were a lot of these injuries being reported. First of all, I'm not pro or anti-vax. Let's just step back and understand what the immune system, how it works, in its normal state. When you have a healthy immune system, we're interacting with other human beings. Mm-hmm. We get exposed to different types of pathogens, and your body actually awaits pathogens. And there were certain cultures, when people got ill, they would take the pus or the ingredients and they would shoot it up people's nose. It may sound somewhat disgusting. Or in villages, when a horse or a cow got sick, they would take the sneezing of the horse and give it to the others. It was called inoculation. In African
measles parties in England.
Measles parties, chickenpox. In Africa, they did a technique called variolation, where they would essentially do a small scraping of the skin or an incision and give the disease. So humans have known that the exchange of these diseases is not a bad thing. You build immunity. However, vaccines were an attempt to replicate that in a way that you created a deadened virus, and then you added all sorts of exogenous components, mercury and thimerosal, all these other things, aluminum, which the effects of those on the body are not well understood because of the complexity of the human immune system. So by 86, there were injuries being reported. And then instead of getting rid of it, Ted Kennedy, John Kennedy's brother, probably wanting to preserve his brother's legacy, instead of eliminating it, put a big Band-Aid. It was called the National Vaccine Injury Act, which basically said that we're going to protect pharmaceutical companies from being sued, and the U.S. government would take on the hit, so you could sue the U.S. government if your child got sick, and there was a limitation of liability. And then since then, we've seen more injuries and what we call the anti-vaxxer medical freedom movement. The reason I share that is, from a business perspective, vaccines actually have no real equivalent regulatory framework. They don't even, of the 30 vaccines promoted for kids, guidelines by the CDC, not one of them, and listen very carefully, not one of them has been double-blind saline placebo tested. It may be horrific. I didn't believe it when I first heard this.
Really?
Yes.
And the vaccines that are given to children have not been through
the 30 in the United States that are on the gut, except one, which was the HPV vaccine. And if you actually look at the history of that testing, you know what double-blind placebo-controlled means. You take one group of people, you give them the medicine. Another group of people get a saline, just salt water. And that is called neither the doctor conducting the research or the people getting it know who got what. Both sides are double-blinded. Well, in the HPV vaccine, which was claimed out of that 1 out of 30 to be double-blind placebo-controlled, quite fraudulent. One group of people got the vaccine. Another set of people didn't get the saline, John. They got the aluminum sulfate, which is the adjuvant in which the vaccine sits on. And then a small group of 300 people got saline. Then what the analysis at the end of the day, they said, well, both sets of people were around 2.3% immune disorder, so around the same. And then they put the saline group in the other one. And unfortunately, most MDs don't read the package inserts. So what you've done is you've created if you're a business person, you say, wow, my business over here is tanking. Here, I could have an extraordinary opportunity. I could build vaccines. I can never get sued. The US government will take the hit. And separate from that, I'm not in the same regulatory, low risk, high return, low liability. Okay. So now step back, what's going on? You have three major players here. So what's happened is, if you think about it in sort of a weapon of what I call what's going on right now, is that, and this is very well architected, if the tip of their weapon is basically the fact that now we have 7.2 billion people. Just step back from a pure business perspective. Anyone here who runs a business, we're always trying to find the killer product that we can sell to everyone really easily. Remember, if you run a company, 50% of your costs easily goes into sales and marketing. You have to build your marketing staff. You have to figure out how you're going to leads. Maybe 8 to 10% is R&D, but you have to. So now imagine you could have 7.2 billion people, 7.2 billion people being your customers, but you never have to sell or market to them. It is a captive audience. So just think that through. Your industry's failing over here. Imagine if we could move that industry to what we call mandated medicine, mandated vaccines. So when I start,
I'll check with our viewers just in the comment, who here agrees with compulsory vaccination? Just let's see in the comment section, because I think we'll find that most people here are completely against mandatory vaccination. There's a bit of a lag on it, but we'll find out. That's our concern over here, is that we're being.
So the issue is, I'm not pro or anti-vax. Let me tell you why. Because we live in a different world right now. The issue is personalized medicine. Remember in 2003 when the Genome Project ended and we created the field of systems biology? Concomitant with that, Western medicine started recognizing one size does not fit all, that we needed to move to what's called precision and personalized medicine. And in that field, I'm considered one of the leading experts. And I just gave a talk at the NSF. But one of the important things in that field is that you can't give the same medicine to everyone. Even though 3 people have diabetes, each of those people may need a different medicine. So let's say when it comes to the immune system, some of us may have grown up in dirt and had measles, and we grew up with, and we have a resilient immune system. Now consider a child who was brought in a very pristine home. Everything was mopped and cleaned. They weren't able to touch with anyone. They weren't able to play with dirt or animals, etc. Well, they're going to be in some ways much more immunocompromised, in the sense much more reactive if they ever came across certain compounds, right, pathogens. That child may need to be titrated some type of quote unquote vaccine or immunization before you let them out, because they may have such a reactive reaction. You follow what I'm saying? The child who grew up with everything in some ways immunized.
This is why anybody on here, please do share this feed right now if you haven't shared it, because I'm just looking at some of the feedback. I mean, virtually every single person on here does not agree with compulsory vaccination. I'm not anti-vax. You know, if somebody wants to vaccinate, let them vaccinate. But I think the world needs much more education. And thank you.
Yeah, it's much more education. But the reality is, if you truly want to be, from the healing standpoint, one size does not fit all. And so this comes down to, where does healing really come from? Healing is not going to come from top-down mandated medicine. You can look at the results. In the United States, after 40 years of Mr. Fauci being in the NIH, you know, the United States has the highest infant mortality rates, the lowest longevity rates. You know, obesity is skyrocketing. You can look at the data. If you just want to judge someone on the data, you should be fired, because you haven't delivered on what you promised. The health in the United States is declining. That's among the Western world. So if you go back to this point of what I believe it's going on, and this is why I believe Bill Gates knows what he's doing. By way of analogy, 1983, I was working for a software company. Some of you may remember Lotus 123. Remember the old spreadsheets? Some of the older folks on the Lotus 123. Do you remember 123 was a spreadsheet in 1986, long before Excel came? And people used to call the PC the 123 machine. So Lotus had the monopoly. And I was working at Lotus then. There was a gentleman by the name of Jim Manzi who was the CEO. And I remember there was this other company coming called Microsoft. And they had created an operating system called DOS. By the way, Bill Gates did not create DOS. He bought it from someone, and through his family's network, he sold it to IBM. And DOS became the operating system every IBM PC went out with. Now, Lotus 123 was running on that operating system. They were an application. And I remember Manzi, even though Lotus was the #1 spreadsheet, he had an awakening. He goes, oh my God, we're going to lose to Microsoft. And he goes, we don't own the operating system. And within 3 to 5 years after that, Lotus got destroyed. Microsoft not only owned the operating system, but remember, they created the suite, Excel, PowerPoint, and what was the other one? Word, okay? Those were the apps that run on the OS. So he or she who owns the operating system wins the game. You own the entire everything above it. So that's how Microsoft dominated the PC world. So now go to, what is the operating system of the human body? It is the immune system. It is our bloodstream. So imagine a company owning our OS and all the apps that ride above it. That's the way. So, and when we used to build software, I know Gates, it took me a while to figure. I had this epiphany actually this morning when I was, waking up. Is that Gates understands it's called the vertical model, verticalization of the industry. You own the OS, then you own verticals. I hope everyone's following me on that.
What you just said, could you just repeat that? Because I think that point that you just made, you said is one size does not.
So if you have your iPhone, right, this has an operating system on it, right? It's called iOS. If you have Android, it has a different operating system on it. Well, in 1980s, there was an operating system every PC sold with. It was called Disk Operating System, DOS. Well, the creator of DOS was actually a kid somewhere who Bill Gates went and bought it from him because his mom or dad found out that IBM was looking for an OS. So he went and bought it and then flipped it. And that's where Bill Gates built his fame, as though he was the one who created DOS. But owning the operating system meant you owned all the applications that went above the operating system, right? So if you have the Apple iPhone, Apple owns that OS. Now you as a developer can build an application, but you're restricted because you don't own the operating system. So in 1986, there was a company called Lotus, which built an app called Excel. 123. It was they had a monopoly. Every major corporation used 123. And so Lotus was riding on their high horses, right? They were making tons of money.
So what you're saying is that if you own the operating system, and what Gates is, explain to me what you think Gates is trying to do.
So the model is, so what is the operating system here? So the operating system here is a human immune system, is the bloodstream of all humanity. If you can own the operating system from a pure consumer standpoint, if you're Procter & Gamble, right, you want to make sure everyone buys toothpaste, right? Remember, there was a time toothpaste didn't exist. My great-grandfather would make his own toothpaste, okay? But if you could sell a bottle of something and tell everyone, look, your teeth are going to fall out, you need to use this. Well, that has a lot of people you can sell to. If you're a drug company and you're selling Lipitor for heart ailment, that can only maybe sold to around 1 billion people because not everyone has heart issues. But imagine creating, owning the OS that you don't own individual diseases, heart disease, liver disease, Alzheimer's, which are above the operating system of the immune system. Because when you look at it, John, from a biological perspective, in traditional systems of medicine, do you know what the traditional healers say? All disease is one disease. All disease is one disease, and all solution is one solution. And that refers to the operating system, which is our immune system. Our immune system is the oldest, you can go back billions of years. It's what protects us, right? If we don't have that OS, we don't exist. So now, what is the immune system? The immune system is that part of our body which interacts with the external world, gets resilient, playing in dirt, having dogs, all these important things, eating the right nutrients of vitamin D, vitamin A, the right things, your body gets strong. That is your immune system.
How can we support and shield the immune system?
Oh, what's that?
How can we support and shield?
Well, the first of all is to recognize that it is an immune system. It's a complex system. It is not any one little piece. Remember that it's not the elephant with little parts. It's a complex, interconnected system. It involves a microbiome, those beautiful bacteria in our gut. We have viruses. We have 380 trillion viruses. We have the innate immune system, which is all the stuff in our eyes, the nose, the ears, the mucous membranes. When a virus first comes, it involves the T cell, B cell system. It involves the interferon system. And by the way, there's videos I have people can go review. The bottom part is it's a complex system. That's the first thing everyone should know. The second thing everyone should know before we start talking about what you put in to support that immune system is that a pathogen, a virus, a bacteria, a parasite, a fungus, it doesn't come and eat you. So anyone who's seen Hollywood movies that something comes and attacks you and bites you and kills you, that's not how it works. The issue is when you have a strong immune system, your body takes a hit and it may have some sniffles and you may get sick, but it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. We're supposed to be exposed to these things and get stronger. Now, how do you get disease or how do these things harm you? Well, when your immune system is compromised. Analogy, you have your iOS or your operating system, from Apple or Android, and you forget to, do the updates after 5 years, right? Your system's not going to work. You're going to get different openings, different viruses can come in. It's a very good analogy, okay?
Yeah.
So here we have to maintain our immune system. Well, how do you do that? Because if you don't maintain it, when your body is not firing on all 6 cylinders, let's say the immune system has 6 cylinders that all need to be firing, or the other analogy is I take both of your hands and I tie it behind your back and I, tie one of your legs down. You only have one leg, an attacker comes to you. What are you going to do? Your one leg is going to go crazy and start flailing everywhere. So if all of the 6 cylinders or whatever the number of cylinders in your body are not working right, your body will use one of its systems. Let's say it's called cytokines, for example. So how could that happen? Well, if you eat a lot of sugar, John, tremendous amount of high sugar diets, what will happen is your body will create what's called things like candida, which create gliotoxins. Those gliotoxins knock out your macrophages, for example, which are one of your cylinders. And it may knock out your T cells, which create support antibodies. Now your body just has this one leg flailing, one cylinder, which is called cytokines. So when a pathogen comes in there's not a beautiful, orchestra that takes place, right? The innate system kicks in, your interferon, and you don't even notice it. Maybe you get a little eye itch, or maybe you cough, and it comes and goes. Instead, you have one system not only try to attack that pathogen, but each of these pathogens, Johns, goes into different parts of your body. They have a proclivity. The polio pathogen wants to go into your myelin sheath in your spine. So it's your body goes and attacks that area. In the case of the coronavirus, it goes to the epithelial tissues in your lungs. So in the immune compromised,
because that's where it likes to live type thing. That's its favorite.
Exactly. So remember, the virus has a protein shell around it, and it has RNA, DNA inside of it. And what is, a virus is sort of an interesting thing. It's not a bacterium, which is an organism. It's sort of dead until it comes into interaction with our cells. And the virus essentially wants to replicate itself. Its job is to replicate itself. So the way it does it, it enters out one of our beautiful cells, enters in, takes over the cellular machinery, replicates its own RNA. It's quite amazing. It's like a car factory. It makes itself and it produces more of itself and it leaves. So in the normal case, when that virus is replicating, it sheds its body, which is called the protein body, and your body knows, your immune system knows how to take care of it. The proteins of that virus, based on the type of virus, will go to land in different parts of your body. In the case of Ebola, they go to your arterial endothelial, near your tissue.
Understand.
Right?
So getting a lot of questions, and actually his grace has asked a question. What is the effect of the 5G on the immunity? Is this an area that you have looked into?
It's an area. So it's a very good question. Look, many years ago, in 1983, I did research on. There's a project I did over at Harvard looking at the effect of electromagnetic radiation. Remember when people were living under high tension wires? There was a report people are getting cancer, electrical wires. So one of the interesting things that came out of that research towards the end of it, unfortunately, that research I found out was funded by the European Power and Electric Board. So they didn't really want us to find anything bad. Okay. But towards the end of that, it was only a 6-month project. I came across some very interesting papers written on what is known as the third eye or the pineal gland. In mythology, we call it the third eye. And if you meditate, you can actually, there's some interesting experiences you can have. I'm not going to get into it here, but the pineal gland, it is acknowledged by many endocrinologists, it may be the central controller of our entire endocrine system, where the pineal gland is composed of piezoelectric crystals. So what I was coming to find, John, which I'm resurrecting that research, is that electromagnetic waves can perturb your endocrine system. Now, we have a lot more waves now occurring than ever before, right? That was just electrical waves. Right now we have other types, Wi-Fi, all these different waves. So in 2 weeks from now, I'm going to be sharing what, I don't want to do it prematurely, but what I can tell you is that the electromagnetic waves definitely, in my view, affect the human body. I think because what it turns out is that the human body is actually an electromagnetic being. Our fascia, which is not the muscle, not the nerves, is very powerful. So anyway, to answer that question, I'll have some data, but what I can tell you is we're actually an electromagnetic being.
Cool. And
we have electromagnetics taking place. So and by the way, that goes all the way down to the cellular level. So there clearly is effect, but I want to share with you when I have some of the molecular systems models that we're working on so I can speak more. So yes, there is an effect. The question is how much?
When will you be sharing the data on 5G? Because there's a lot of people here in this country very, very worried about whether or not there is a link between the 5G exposure. I'm sure you're aware that online there are all sorts of theories as to whether or not 5G is somehow related to people getting sick from the virus. Some people say it is, some people say it isn't. When will you be sharing what you found out?
In about 2 weeks, we're going to share some preliminary results that we have from our systems approach. One of the things I do want to talk about is, as we're talking about where we're now, we clearly know in the now, there's a clear monetary, I hope that's clear, there's a deep monetary interest to vaccinate everyone, to create a global elite, which ensures that Big Pharma has its dominion over everyone's bloodstream. And if you go back to that, if you look at the Gates Foundation, the Chan Zuckerberg, and you bring in the Gates Clinton Foundation, they've all been pro-vaccine, supporting the WHO and UN agenda called Strategic Development Goals 3, which has painted a quote unquote a utopia. But that utopia, according to their own document, demands that we vaccinate everyone. That's what it says there, John. No one should be left behind. And the backers of that are the International Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association. So in my view, I just want to finish this. The Gates operating system model here is the operating system of owning the immune system. And you verticalize that, where the apps of that ownership are you divvy it up. In the old days, you know, when kings fought and they took over land, they divvied up territory. Here, in my view, is to own for different of the major. So Merck may own HPV vaccine, right? They get the monopoly on that. Someone else may own hepatitis 1B, but you come in at it with the big pharma initiative. As some of you know, McKinsey's a lot of smart people. They're the ones who put together Gavi that supported Gates in figuring out the vaccine alliance with the Clinton Foundation supporting it. So what you have is you have a tip of this spear, which is to centralize this notion of the strategic sustainable development goals, a utopia. But in order to achieve that utopia, we must vaccinate everyone. And this is explicitly stated. And it's backed by very large pharmaceutical companies. So in this model, Gates and Clintons and the Zuckerbergs are really their PR. The foundations are being used as a PR machinery to support the back end in a vertical model where if you lay down a human being, and I was doing this diagram earlier, that pieces of our bloodstream will be owned. And now you're looking at 7.2 billion people through mandated vaccinations, no more sales and marketing. You get a captive audience and recurring revenue. So that becomes very valuable. It may seem initially counterintuitive. Well, sure, let's crash the economy of all these countries, because the next time, 6-7 months from now, we're basically putting a gun to people's heads. Hey, do you want that to occur again? Do you want to crash the economy, John? John, you got to get your immunity card. That's where this ends up going.
That is actually quite shocking. I don't think it's going to be that shocking to a lot of people watching. And we're going to give people, you know, at the end of this, a list of where they can get your videos and so on and so forth. But I do have a question, because I know that you have written to the president. And funnily enough, I received a text from Charlie Kirk's girlfriend just before you came on, and she is a great follower of your videos. So she will be watching tonight.
Okay. Best to you.
Yeah. No, she's wonderful. Erica is absolutely fantastic. And you have proposed a plan. I know that you have written to the president to propose a plan. Could you just go over what was your proposal? How have you advised the president? And also, I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on the hydroxychloroquine.
Sure. Yeah, I did a little video on it, but so let's talk about the plan. So the plan that I proposed to the president, again, through the entire conversation, I hope I haven't bored too many people, but the two pillars that I kept emphasizing, if you remember, were systems and one size does not fit all. I hope that's clear. We live in an interconnected system, complex systems, and one size does not fit all. So just take those two points, and so you can start thinking about the world in a very different way, that we're all very unique, that you never should apply what's called a reductionist model, and you should never apply one size fit all. So now the proposal that Fauci has been putting forward is one size fit all. That is the old medieval model of medicine. It's a model of medicine which means one size fits all. And remember, one size fits all means monopoly. It's much more easier to shove stuff down people's throat. These are the standard vaccines. Everyone must get it. That's what part of the psychological tuning is. So Fauci's model was everyone. We shut down the entire world economy. Essentially, that's what happened. And we follow the exact same process, the intervention, the medical intervention for all people. That's not one size, that's one size fit all. And in that model, all of us have been quarantined. All of us are being treated the same way. So in that letter to the president, I said in the letter, I don't have it here. We'll read it.
Agreeing with his Duke Marlborough agrees with you. So that's
yeah. So we can read parts of the letter. I have it, but in the letter, I said, you know, Fauci has built his entire career entire career on a fake science. For example, he's the one who tried to correlate HIV causes AIDS. It's a longer discussion, but he has built his entire career on a fake science model of the immune system, and it's a one-size-fit-all model. So what we did is we put every quarantine anyone. Here's the actual solution if we want it, or a proposed solution where you say, look, there are people who are clearly immunocompromised, those people with pre-existing conditions, those people with diabetes who smoke a lot, etc. Put that into one group. Another group of people are frankly quite healthy. They could work, they get colds there, but they're not immunocompromised. They don't have pre-existing conditions. Then you have a third set of people who are critically ill, who are actually, their lungs are filling up with, fluid, and they're on the verge of death. Third group of people. And then you do have another set of people who may have been identified as COVID-19. Something, the PCR, polymerase chain reaction test has said they have a fragment. By the way, these tests are quite inaccurate. It's a longer thing. Even Kary Mullis, who won the Nobel Prize for creating PCR, he always warned people, look, this test is a qualitative test. This is a guy who built the test and won the Nobel Prize. So be as it may, you have people have COVID-19. So in the letter to the president, I said, you have these four groups of people. First of all, let's take those people who are critically ill, support their immune systems immediately by high dosage vitamin A and vitamin D. And by the way, what I'm saying is not anything unique. It's been in the literature for many, many years. Many practitioners have done this. In fact, high dosage vitamin A, it's a pediatric dose I recommended, 400,000 IUs in a short period of 2 days. So you're just hitting it really hard. And then 50,000 IUs for 2 days of vitamin D. Why did I say that? Well, vitamin D is an amazing antimicrobial, incredible. And vitamin A regulates cytokeratin formation, and among many other items for immune health. And if you go just do a simple search in PubMed, you'll see the amazing infectious diseases that vitamin A lowered going back to the 1900s. So none of what I'm saying is some brilliance that I made up. It's
people are loving this, and this is the exact data that people here want to hear.
Yeah, so vitamin A and vitamin D. So I'm just taking that critically ill group, high dosage. And then I said the third thing is, for God's sake, give these people, before you start putting on ventilators, if you're going to do that, give them, for God's sake, high dose, pharmaceutical dose vitamin C. High dose. In the letter to the president, I said 100 grams of vitamin C.
Wow.
Titrated over, by the way, that's in the literature, over 24 hours. No side effects. Now, if you want to lower it, which is also in the ICU literature, 10 grams to 15 grams. Why is vitamin C important? I told you vitamin D is a hormone, and it is an antimicrobial. It literally creates cathelicidins to go shoot the cell walls of bacteria and viruses. But vitamin C does something very powerful. It literally, think about it as a shock absorber. Remember I said that you have the cytokine storm? Well, vitamin C comes in and it knocks down an important chemical which creates that cytokine storm. It modulates it. It's like a beautiful shock absorber. The other thing vitamin C does, it eats up all those free radicals. When people are undergoing the cytokine storm, their lungs are filling up with that fluid. You have a lot of reactive oxygen species. Third, it reduces inflammation, NF-kappa beta. It inhibits that. And fourth, it stops viral replication. Okay? So it's but you have to go to that high dosage, John. So that's what I said. In fact, yesterday I just did a video, an ER doctor who probably was under massive stress, his immune system was lowered. He ended up getting COVID-19 in the ER, and he was he went very fastly down. They put him on ventilator.
Yes, great. Tell that story. It's a great
story. Yeah. So this is so I put out my thing about a month ago to the president. So hopefully maybe they saw it. Hopefully they did. It'd be great. But but the Los Angeles Times and the mainstream media had to cover it because he was an ER doctor, and I'm sure he had a lot of colleagues. So people really wanted to help him. They're willing to do anything. So here's a guy, I think 46 years old. He was a football player. It was an MD who had played in the Rose Bowl. He was not a weak guy, but you can see the immune system can get weakened. Clearly, if you're an emergency room doctor with all the stuff that's going on, I'm sure his immune system was stressed out significantly. So he ends up getting COVID-19, and he declines very rapidly, so rapidly that he's put on a ventilator. and given 5 days to live. Within 5 days, his kidneys, heart functions, everything started to deteriorate rapidly. They said he had, I think, 2 days to live, a day or so. Because I bet you he had a lot of colleagues who were his friends cared for him, they said, why don't we do an experimental treatment? They had known that there was an immunosuppressive drug for cancer. They included that, suppress the immune system. But, they also included the high-dose vitamin C treatment. So I was very, very happy.
I saw they even reported it in the LA Times, didn't they?
In the LA Times and the New York Times. And by the way, Facebook and Google, if you say high-dose vitamin C, they remove your website. Well, they better start changing their views on this because you're killing people by not allowing them to do this.
So just let me clarify this. Facebook and Google are actually suppressing the fact that high vitamin C is working.
Yeah. So for example, I did a post. I said vitamin D, for example, I said is a proven solution, to reducing respiratory infection. 80,000 papers written on vitamin D, John. They put me in Twitter jail. Unbelievable. Wow. So you have two major companies. Facebook, by the way, Facebook gets right now about $1 billion to $2 billion in pharmaceutical funding. And Chan, his wife is an MD, and they've created $1 billion foundations for vaccine research. So think about this. This is criminal. They control the flow of information for all of us. And over here, they're in the vaccine and pharmaceutical business. And yet,
Kelly has just said, sorry to interrupt you. She's just said, great stuff. I need all this literature. And so she is just loving this communication.
Who's that, John?
Kirstie Alley, who has a huge Twitter following and is she's been an old friend for many, many years. And she's a lovely, great girl, really, is what I would say. Now, so who is the enemy? Who is the enemy here?
Well, the enemy really here, it is the outward weapon of that enemy is big pharma, but the fundamental philosophical enemy is a finite set of people who think they know better than all of us, and it's top-down control. That the state, an automaton state, and I believe in this model, China, if you want to think about it, there's a global set of elites, that China is almost their first beta test of this. China's in the large scheme of things is a test. A finite set of enlightened Chinese Communist Party people who believe that China should be one big factory, 200 million cameras watching all their people, giving them a social score, that this is the model of how civilization should be, where you lose your humanity, you use technology to head us into a dark age where we all are little automatons, John. So when I say the enemy, I'm talking about a very small set of people. Look, it was not so long ago, there was a time when people thought that one person derived all their power and we were all supposed to be subjects, right? And that power got devolved when people realized that we're all spirit, we're all a co-creator with God, and that if you believe in that, or a co-creator with spirit, whatever religious tradition you have, and that the essence of being a human being was to fulfill that ability to co-create through our ability to innovate, to create, be an artist, be a plumber, whatever it is that you choose your dreams. So one path is you have a dream that you want to pursue. We compel that with our own responsibility. The other says, I'm going to outsource that to somebody else, and the state will govern that. So from philosophically, the enemy is, and the dialectic here is one set of thought which says that top-down governance, and I will tell you what to do. I know better than you. The other says, no, I know better. By the time I got up this morning, I made 100 decisions for myself, what I should put in my mouth, whether I should vaccinate my kids or not, etc. So this is a fundamental issue. But there is a finite set of people who think that they know better philosophically. And that is a power and control piece. Now, it can be very profitable if you can actually impose that power and control over vast majorities of people, and you impose your will by saying everyone must be vaccinated. So on the one hand, you can observe everyone, a surveillance state, and the other hand, you are essentially owning people's bloodstream. There you go. That's your operating system. You watch, in the book I wrote up there called The Future of Email, many years ago, when Hillary Clinton, remember she put her server in her basement, someone said, Dr. Shiva, what do you think about? So I gave a quote to the New York Times. I said, look, she should be in jail because she put that computer in her home so she could have deniability. But more importantly, what's really happening here is that one set of people will have their private servers, and the rest of us, so it's the haves and the have-nots of the future, it's not going to be by wealth. It's going to be who can own their own surveillance, that they can build digital walls to protect themselves. And the rest of us will be on Facebook, on Hotmail, where everything is observed, tracked. And part of what I talked in that book is the notion is observability and controllability. That's systems theory. In an airplane, if the airplane's going off course, you're getting data, observation, and then you do inputs to bring it on course. Observability and controllability. Now imagine with the technologies we have today, a singular state in a consolidated way could do this in mass with the computing power we have. We could observe human activity and say, you know what, there's some dissenters over there. They don't want to comply. We got to bring them back into alignment or get rid of them. But if you go look at fundamentally what's going on, it's about treating people in that model as a statistical lump. It's not, there's uniqueness anymore, John. Everyone is one statistical blob. And when you create a statistical blob, you can control people. And part of that psychological testing is, can I keep everyone in their home? Can I put metaphors, flattening the curve, social distancing? Like, that's the only two ways.
Well,
forget it.
It's very interesting that you say that, because I was sent an article today by one of the smartest people I know. And he said the big lie about all of this is this thing, we are all in this together, because it sort of clumps us all together as one big generality. Whereas you've said, we're all different and we all have different needs.
Right.
One of the reasons that we created and are creating, and in the process creating, Camelot Castle TV is, the round table, Camelot Castle, has been an icon for centuries and centuries and centuries. We have the capacity to attract attention. Watching you now are some of, because I know them and I can see who's on the stream, some of the biggest donors, some of the biggest freedom fighters, and some of the greatest people that have helped to maintain man's freedom over the last 30, 40 years. What I want you to tell them, and please, how can we win? What do we need to do to win? What do we need to do to win?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first of all, I think we know who the enemy is. I mean, we can go into that, but I think broadly people understand it. I think people also understand what the phenomenon is, that the tools that we need to win, we need to take. If you look at the power, profit, and control, which is their goal, John, the enemy's goal, our goal is truth, freedom, and health. So the first thing is people should sort of meditate on that. Power, profit, and control over here, truth, freedom, and health. Now, the way to get to the enemy, the enemy has from a systems perspective, we should also understand how our enemy thinks. Their model is exclusivity, opacity, secrecy, tremendous amounts of, you don't share knowledge. It's a few set of people are going to tell us what's important. Centralization, depersonalization, like you said, generalities. We're a statistical lump. And censorship. These are their approaches to path to power, profit, and control. Now, many people, when they talk about how we win, they say, well, let's fight fire with fire. Let the ends justify the means. And you can look historically, there are many movements who start that way and they end up in the same place. So we have to have a different set of modus operandi. We have to have a different set of principles. And that is exactly the opposite of what they do, which is we should be inclusive. Obviously not to people who have power, profit, and control, okay? Inclusivity in the sense of transparency, which is the opposite of opacity. A systems approach versus their reductionist approach, where we know the ankle bone is connected to the foot bone. We take a personalization, which means each person is unique, and decentralization. Those are the six sort of, and freedom, right? Those things are how we get to truth, freedom, and health. So that's the fundamental. So part of that is, John, is people understanding systems thinking. How is that connected? So what I ended up doing, John, before I even got into the Senate race, is that for the last 20 years, I said, how can I teach people systems thinking? So remember when I got back from India, I said I did that little course? That course did really well. Then a lot of people around the world wanted to offer my course. I made money off of it, etc. But I could only do it. So what I did was I created a small institute, went online, and I in literally 15 hours, John, or less, I could teach people systems thinking. It's a course. So we have that up online called systemshealth.com. And then I even created a smaller version of it for 25 bucks, John. And it wasn't even to make money, because when I ran for Senate, I didn't want to be a politician, right? I want to do politics now. I wanted it to be integrated with who I was. So our campaign, if you go to Shiva for Senate, says truth, freedom, and health.
Now, could you give me those website addresses so that?
Yes. So first off, if people want to understand broadly, I created a course which we beta tested, gold tested. It's called Systems Health. And the goal, I don't have the website up, but the goal of Systems Health is I want to create a systems revolution for truth, freedom, and health. And it's fascinating. That was a vision I had 10 years ago, John. So when people go there, they can learn this education. And then I've created a model, John, where people can also become their own universities. And the model is learn, teach, and serve. Because what I learned, John, is when I teach something, whether it's physics, you actually learn. And educational system. So I will teach you systems health. You can learn systems theory. I will teach you Siddha and Ayurveda. I will teach you systems biology. Then I'll teach you how they're interconnected. And then I give you a tool, John, where people can use that tool to understand their body as a system. They can use that tool to understand their homeostasis. They can also see how different foods manipulate their own system. It's not a medical thing like we said, but it's more to understand that there's a different way of looking at the body through different forces, almost levers, and they're much more intuitively to understand. MDs, everyone's gone through this. So that's systems with an S health.com. But then what I did when I decided to run for Senate, I said, look, I'm not going to be some politician who says, I'm going to do for you this, give me money. And then when I become politicians, right, then I'm going to deliver. So what we did was we integrated it into our running for the Senate. So when people donate money, we made it like nothing, 25 bucks. We give people a book called System and Revolution. It's like a handbook to the guide to change, John, and basically teaches people systems theory. It teaches people in very simple ways, everything I learned at MIT, John, but written in a way that everyone can learn it. Part of the problem I wanted to solve is so you don't have to go to MIT to learn this. And then I gave people a tool called yourbodyyoursystem.com. So if you want to go to Shiva for Senate, which is our Senate campaign, Shiva for Senate.com, and whatever you want to donate would be great, because, and by the way, John, we've been getting so many donations, bottoms up. I mean, explosive. So, but the goal of this was fundamentally to teach people three things: the interconnection of truth, freedom, and health. We must start. So this is a path to victory. We have to have a theoretical foundation. You can't have a nuclear reaction until we understood E equals MC squared. So I'm going to give you the E equals MC squared right now. That equivalent is truth, freedom, and health. And they're interconnected. Let's start with freedom. Freedom has been the long march of humankind, freedom against slavery. And it's always gone through its various manifestations. And I would argue what we talked about, where, like you said, a precipice as an inflection point, because we see these forces wanting to own our bloodstream.
Sorry, just an alarm is being switched off.
Yeah.
We generate power.
Is that the alarm that I got to stop talking?
You just look at the alarm. It'll be off.
Okay. Sure.
I don't know
have some water. Yeah.
It's a false alarm, but
No worries. What you can do, John, is you can go mute on yours, John, right?
it's on mine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, hi
There. Oh, are we still live? Do we lose John? Can everyone else see me, or do we lose everything? Can everyone see? Oh, there you go.
Sorry about that.
No worries. Take your time. We can take a quick break. This is our commercial break.
Yeah, commercial break.
Yeah.
I will my feed, and then it won't pick up my mic, I don't think.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. What happens, John, is there you go. Good. Okay. So let's start with freedom. So freedom is fundamental of being a human being. So freedom of speech, freedom of debate, freedom of not being knocked off Facebook or Twitter, etc. So freedom is what gives us the opportunity to exercise the scientific method. because without debate, without discourse, we cannot actually probe the universe in a very, very profoundly innocent way, where we ask a question, we do experiments, we gather data, and if we're wrong, we're wrong. If we're right, we create laws and we create a deeper understanding of the universe. But it comes from freedom.
That's what we say here. Is we say the table was round for a reason, and the knights of the realm have to share their knowledge. They have to share.
I say,
and in fact,
that's great.
Realize that in King Arthur's day, there were actually thousands of knights. It was a whole communication system. The table, of course, had about 24 seats, and our round table here, you know, and you have Lancelot and all of those knights, but actually there were thousands of knights, and their job was, it was a communication system for the country to allow the organism to communicate. And the whole idea was to share the knowledge. And I don't know if you know this, but there was the first architect of the Golden Age was Prince Harun al-Rashid, who ruled from Baghdad in 820, and he passed a law that every Thursday, by law, people had to share their ideas, and that's what he did. And so the sharing of ideas is so important. And just to your point, thank you.
Yeah. So they had the concept of the public square, where the commons that you shared ideas. Now, this is important because the aspect of freedom, John, in our campaign, I'll come back to this, but what I want to do is I want to go through this triangle, then I want to come back to give an actual tangible solution that I've come up with for each one of those that can actually be exercised. So it's not just theory and it's not just abstract through legislation. And I'll talk about that. But first is freedom. So open discourse, open debate. Today, what we have is a few major academic institutions, peer-reviewed journals. If you look at the way knowledge is created now, it's consolidated among big academia. You have the NIH in the biological sciences, NSF who essentially control vast amounts of money in the biological sciences. So if you're an academic, you basically are taught to shut up, and it's all regression to the mean. It's about regression to the mean. It's about mediocrity. New ideas are not allowed if they don't fit the orthodoxy. So, and it's compelled through suppression of free speech. So what you end up is, you don't get to the scientific method, you end up with scientific consensus. Scientific consensus is the opposite of the scientific method. So if all of your peers say, yes, CO2 is a pollutant, we must enter the Paris Accords, everyone goes along with it. Forget the fact that CO2 is not a pollutant. Forget the fact that Paris Accords actually incentivizes China and India to pollute. China was about 11 billion metric tons of carbon. They're incentivized to pollute to 22 billion, after which in 2030, they have to buy carbon credits from the markets, which means some people are going to become extraordinary trillionaires, and we have more pollution. And by the way, by case in point, in Wuhan, where this virus came from, in Wuhan, 6 months before, there were massive protests of the unfortunate citizens of China, because China's building incinerator plants all over China because they have a garbage problem. Everyone should look this up. And there have been protests since, in fact, 2005. And remember, in China, you protest, you say anything against the government, it's not such a great thing to do. It's not, you have free speech. So throughout Wuhan, there were protests, and suddenly they sort of disappeared, and now they're completely gone. But the freedom is necessary for us to practice a scientific method so we get to truth. Otherwise, we have scientific consensus and we get to fiction. You know, whether it's the immune system, whether it's, CO2, whether it's, you go down the list of controversies we have today. Now with truth, we can go and create real problems. We can identify what the real problem is and the real solution. The real problem is pollution. It's not CO2. The real problem is not viruses. The real problem is that we've compromised our immune systems with dirty air, dirty water, dirty food. We've taught people not to eat well. We destroy our soil. We have big ag. That's what the real problem is. But instead of these lobbyist politicians addressing that, they want to move it to the sphere of a fake problem from fiction, which is, the problem is that we don't have enough vaccines. The problem is fear. So instead of using freedom, they want to replace that with fear. Fear gets you to fiction. Freedom gets you to truth. And with truth, we can identify real problems and real solutions, which gets us to health. And what is health? Health is where we have resilient bodies. You talked about immortality. In spirit, in physical nature, we can start looking at the world in a different way. And with freedom, to close the loop, we have the warrior strength to fight for freedom. You see? So you can go from freedom, you can go to truth, you can get strong bodies, not only physical bodies, I'm talking about strong infrastructure, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. And from that health, we can fight for freedom. Now, if you have people, we talked about psychiatric drugs, right? You know, several years ago,
I'm going to read this. Harry Sue Duggan, putting my entire stimulus check into Dr. Shiva's campaign. Done.
Wow, that's very sweet of you. Thank you. Keep them coming. Well, look, the election.
We need to raise 20 million to get you into the Senate.
And the election in Massachusetts, by the way, is not a U.S. My running and our running, frankly, this has become a global phenomenon, is no longer just a U.S. Senate election. It is a movement for truth, freedom, and health. So I hope that helps, John. So how do we get there? So this is, if you
what we have to do, you've got hundreds of willing freedom fighters here.
Right. So
to help you.
In the United States, I'm sure there's an equivalent in UK, but in the United States, there was a very interesting institution that the founders of the country created, which has been maligned and forgotten. It was called the United States Postal Service. Now, when you first hear this, you're going to say, what is he talking about? Well, you know, when the colonists here were, you know, trying to break from the crown would not allow the colonists to have their own freedom of press. So Franklin, in his wisdom, had a vision. So imagine every particle, you know, you talked about the Knights of the Round Table and the communication system, that everyone could be able to communicate among each other for pennies. And that was the United States Postal Service. And it was an extraordinary system, but in those days, you know, they didn't have the internet, they didn't have cell phones, they didn't have fax machines, whatever, right? They had physical letters. And the idea was, I should be able to send John a letter uninterruptible. In fact, the U.S. Postal Service, if people don't know this, concomitant with the Postal Service, they created the police force for the Postal Service. And the police force was intended so even the Postal Service people wouldn't steal your mail. It was a 20-year sentence in prison, which still stands today. So in the United States, you have the Postmaster General and you have the Inspector General. So the Postal Service was created for free communication. It just so happened the bureaucrats in the Postal Service thought they're in the print mail business. So up until 1967, I'm sure this was true in UK, 70% of the mail that went through the Postal Service was political mail. People who were left-wing, right-wing, Green Party, whatever it was, massive discourse of all different politics. Now, in 1997, very important date, is when email volume overtook postal mail volume. And I was running my other company, Echo Mail, and I said, you know what? I said, this is dangerous. As a guy who invented email, I saw something, is because email was actually a vehicle created, you know, to communicate freely. Now, remember what happened in 1993 when the web came, companies like Hotmail, Gmail, Microsoft, right? All these programs came. Hotmail got bought by Microsoft, which gave you free email. Do you remember that? We all signed up for free email. Well, the day we signed up for free email, we gave up our freedom, because what happened in 1997 was more communications. And that was the day email volume overtook postal mail volume. We were starting to communicate our thoughts. Because let me tell you something. When you put something in the written word, it is thought in verbalized. It's your thought. And I know this because I created the technology to analyze email, which was Echo Mail, which was my other company. So what I saw happening was I said, oh my God, you have a few private companies who can observe people's thoughts. So I went to the Postal Service. I was only 29 years old. And I met with the executives. I said, you know what? You guys should offer the equivalent of postal mail. And I believe Americans will pay about $50, the equivalent of public email, public Facebook, and public YouTube. You see where I'm going? And it will be, forget encryption. Everyone can break anyone's encryption. Let's be honest here. Okay? But this will be protected by the constitutional laws of if you intervene and you open anyone's letter or email, it's 20-year sentence in prison. Those guys laughed at me. They thought it was a ridiculous idea. Fast forward, it's a great idea. It's the only way out of this because it's the public commons, like we were talking about. Now, in 2011, I was back at MIT running my new company, and I see this thing on the front page of the Wall Street Journal that the Postal Service is going out of business. Okay. And I said, oh my God, these guys are such idiots. Okay. They should be making billions if they followed the formula. So I attacked them in an article that came out in Time Magazine. By the way, Time Magazine at that point is when all the artifacts went into the Smithsonian, wrote a very nice article saying the man who invented email. I never promoted this. But anyway, they wrote an article saying Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai is saying that the Postal Service is not doing its job. And I got a call from the Inspector General of the Postal Service. He goes, why are you attacking me? I go, Dave, you're not doing your job. So they hired me, John, to put together, they commissioned me. I think they thought they were going to buy me out to quiet me down. But I actually put together 2 reports which showed how the Postal Service could make an extraordinary amount of income and solve the problem of freedom. They haven't done anything with it. This is something the president should do. And just a few days ago, the Postal Service is again going out of business. Okay, but the point is, the Postal for digital rights. So my legislation is a Digital Rights Act that the Postal Service should be rejuvenated to become the public commons. In fact, the Postal Service of the world should become the public commons, and it's protected.
I would like a full write-up, 2 pages, the idea, and I will get it to the right place for you.
I'll do that. So does everyone comprehending this? Yeah. If you give you choice, fine. You want to go on Facebook, but imagine having the equivalent by the people for the people. Now, part of that, John, is there's a thing called a different type of mesh networks. Today, 3 of the top telco companies, AT&T, Verizon, Vodafone, Facebook, and Google, own all of us. If we dissent, they can shut us off. Remember what happened in Tahrir Square in Egypt. As a protest grew, Hosni Mubarak made one call to Vodafone, done. It doesn't matter all this freedom we have. We must have our own public commons, our own network. And that is through mesh networks. So I have a hardware plan and a software plan. Each one of us must become the network, not anyone else. And there's technologies that can do that. So that's how we get to digital rights. Otherwise, we're all screwed. I'm sorry. We're totally screwed because 5 major guys, well, next time you say, this hydroxychloroquine, if I were to choose vitamin A and D versus I would choose that, but I would definitely choose hydroxychloroquine and zinc over, other harsh chemicals because it actually stops replication. But if you go promote that and push that, you have Google or Facebook, which can shut you down. That's the state we're in. Or if you promote vitamins or you promote niacin or you promote different kinds of things, cleanses, right?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the people with the vaccination plan, they don't want this virus cured. They don't want.
No, in fact, if you look at the business model, they have another 200 vaccines in the pipeline. The goal of that model is to compromise the immune system over and over again, horrible foods, more vaccines, and then it creates a beautiful business model. It's a wonderful business model. It's the drug model. Now, how do we get to truth? Well, the singular way we can get to truth is citizen science. Remember, there was a time most of the greatest innovations in the science were not done by the military-industrial complex. This is why when the facts of the invention of email come out, it bothers them, John, so deeply because I did it before I came to MIT. MIT is part of the military-industrial complex. Great school, but it's part of the bastions of power. But email was invented before that.
I don't mind saying this to you. I think you're on a divine mission. I think you've been chosen for this time. And I think the message is extremely important. And I think it's no coincidence that the person that invented email is in a position to communicate. I think God has put you and set you on a very, very special journey. And my wife actually has one question for you. And I'm just going to turn the camera to her. There you go, darling. What is your question?
How are you?
Yeah. Hi. No, someone has been asking about the tests that have been done on COVID-19. Can the tests that are being used distinguish between the coronaviruses that have been around and specifically COVID-19? What's your research on that?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. Let me. So I just want to finish. So I'll come right to that. One more minute. So on the truth side, we need to do what's called citizen science. And what I mean by citizen science is the scientific establishment with the Faucis has become, unfortunately, corrupt. The great scientists don't get to do science anymore. The way to devolve power is citizen science, which means that if we are giving our money, federal funds, to academic institutions, you know what? I own that data. You own that data. We all own that data. So when a scientist is doing an experiment, it should be immediately published to the cloud. There's billions of smart people who can get that data. They can do their own analysis. I can't find any of the climate change data. I don't even know where it is. I should be able to download the satellite data and look at it. Citizen science. The third part of it is, how do we get to health? The way we get to health is we need to eliminate all these middlemen. We need to go away from state-controlled medicine. It should devolve back to the individual, whether I want to use a chiropractor, whether I want to use an MD, whoever I want to use, I should be able to have an interaction with that individual. And health is not the doctor telling me what to do. Health emerges in a participation. So that's the Health Rights Act. So anyway, truth, freedom, and health, digital rights for freedom, citizen rights for truth, and then health rights on how we get health. So let me answer this question. So I hope that's clear. This is not just a slogan. There's a system behind it. There's actually legislation behind it, and it all gives people a way to achieve that. So let's talk about the tests. Okay. Kary Mullis is the incredible, he was an extraordinary chemist. He didn't just come out of academia. He went into academia, then he left, but he won the Nobel Prize in chemistry for the creation of PCR, polymerase chain reaction, the test. Now, when Kary Mullis created that, before he died, he said this many times because he was one of the few people who spoke out against the nonsense of HIV being the causal factor for AIDS. All right. And he said, look, the PCR test is a qualitative test. Today, they are primarily using for COVID-19 the PCR test, the polymerase chain reaction. And what they do there is, they do the nasal swab. And in that nasal swab is they take the nasal swab, which, by the way, if the coronavirus is not a double-stranded virus, it's not DNA, it's an RNA. So think about a ladder cut right down the middle in half. It's an RNA virus. So that virus has all those little, pieces of the ladder, which are called base sequences, nucleotides. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to find if a piece of what they say comes from the coronavirus COVID-19 is in your strand. So they basically have what's called a primer, and they check for that. Okay. Well, the issue is the primer that they're choosing for the coronavirus. The assumption here is that uniquely only comes from that coronavirus, okay? And only from that coronavirus. However, when you do this application of the PCR, you are finding the primer, then you're amplifying it in a way that it becomes qualitative. It's not quantitative. It is not like definitive. And that's by the gentleman who won the Nobel Prize, who created the PCR test. He was very careful in saying, you should not be using this because you're not detecting the virus. What you're detecting is a nucleotide, which may or may not be the virus, okay? Because remember, there's 380 trillion viruses in our body, but we have things called, these vesicles that when your body's under stress, it actually puts out all types of nucleotides, all types of RNA. In fact, the latest research that just came out is that, remember I talked to you about the 20,000 genes? The 20,000 genes are only 2% of your DNA. The other 98% of your DNA turns out to be ribonucleic acids, like the viruses, okay? So when they're finding this little piece and they're matching it, it could be the virus, but it could be other things too. So it's not definitive. It could be other coronaviruses, but it could be other things. And that's why Kary Mullis was very clear, the creator of the PCR test, that it's a qualitative test. So that's one.
The tests being used, are those the tests that they're using?
They're primarily, and now just recently they started creating the antibody test, okay? But that's a little more accurate. But regardless, what's happening with the WHO, people should understand. Remember, if you go to a doctor's office and they diagnose you, the person's away in the back of the computer, they have codes. They have different codes that determine your diagnosis. Those diagnostic codes, if you didn't know it, are determined by the WHO. In the United States, so after you're diagnosed, so they'll say, oh, you have this disease, they have a code XYZ. Then the procedure for a particular disease is a procedural code which is owned by the AMA. But keep it simple. The WHO with coronavirus created 2 codes. One was that you had the virus, you tested quote unquote positive. And the other was something that sort of looks, feels like, and smells like the virus. Very nebulous. In the United States, a friend of mine who's a pediatrician shared with me a letter that the CDC sent out to the hospital administrators, purposely telling them to sort of conflate one over the other. Okay? So what this means is we don't really know what the numerator is. This is why we need citizen science, because when this data is captured, especially by public institutions like government, we don't have to give people's names away, but we should know all of those codes. And next to those codes, we should know what the pre-existing conditions are. One of our friends' husbands just had COVID-19 and he died. Well, you know what? For 20 years, he's been a horrible chain smoker. He's always been going to the hospital. He was intubated multiple times. Now his death record will say COVID-19. Well, that's not true. He was one of the immunocompromised who should have immediately gone on vitamin D, vitamin A, and if they wanted hydroxychloroquine as a prophylactic, and vitamin C. They didn't do that. So that's what's going on. So when you look at 2 unfortunate situations here, you have the codes are designed in such a way to conflate them. There's also an economic incentive in the hospitals to brand people's COVID-19. You get monies for that, and you sell more ventilators. All right. And remember, what's also interesting to note is we are in the flu season. And interesting enough, I saw the data, the amount of pneumonia is going down and COVID-19 is going up. To me, it looks like we're cannibalizing one set of population from the other. But I can tell you that probably most of us have some piece of that coronavirus nucleotide. That's why, according to Robert Koch, who won the Nobel Prize in Medicine, who's really the father of germ theory, Koch's postulates were very clear. In order to prove this virus is the cause of this disease, you must find it in abundance. Step 1. You must be able to then culture it. Step 2. You must be able to then take that culture, give it to another animal, and see the exact same disease. And then you must be able to culture it back. They haven't done that with this. That's right. They never did that with HIV. It was a fiction that was created. So the bottom line, it comes back to the central point. Why aren't we talking about boosting the immune system? And the way we boost the immune system, the number one way you boost the immune system, forget vitamin D, I'm not going to talk about vitamin, you know what it is? Social interactions, relationships with people, love, kindness, fellowship. In 1988, a landmark study was done on social isolation. And about 10 years ago, Stephen Cole did an amazing piece of work showing what happens when you socially isolate human beings and macaque monkeys. You know what happens? You completely destroy your immune system. You increase your body to viral infection. You increase your body to cancer. And recently in his work, what he showed, which was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, that you literally at the genetic level, your body will upregulate inflammatory molecules and your body will downregulate antiviral compounds. So your own powerful pharmaceutical, machinery inside your body, because of social isolation. And it was also shown in the 1988 landmark study that social isolation, the detriments of it are, get this, are worse than diabetes. I mean, worse than high blood pressure, worse than obesity, and worse than smoking. Well, those 3 things are the pre-existing conditions, which are the basis of you getting attacked by whether it's COVID-19, et cetera, and failing. This is completely ridiculous. Yes. We're not saying everyone should go bathe and slobber in infections. And by the way, but what we are saying is if we truly care about public health, truly care about it, well, maybe we should be shutting down the entire world for the heart disease, the high increase in obesity, the high increase in the fact that 1.9 million people in the United States get hospitalized from adverse reactions to pharmaceutical drugs every year. We're not shutting down the country for that, but we are shutting it down for this. And if you're going to do that, concomitantly, why aren't we teaching people how to boost their immune systems? If you want to go to that extreme, why didn't we for the last 6 months or 3 months, whatever it's been now, feels like forever, why haven't we been teaching? And that's what I decided to do. I decided let's educate people on the immune system. Let's educate people on how the immune system functions. And I think everyone wants that. Everyone knows if they have common sense, something doesn't add up. And that's why I think we're here today, because those videos have gone viral all over the world, because people do not like being lied to. And most people still have a gut instinct. Most people still have an intuition. But we should be talking about boosting the immune system. And that's what the opportunity is.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, we do have one other question here. A lot of people have asked me, could you go into details with psychiatry? There's a lot of people in here that are very, very worried about what the psychiatrists are actually doing to children with the drugs like Ritalin, you know, the electroshock, for instance, the prescription of Prozac, and really the serotonin reuptake inhibitors, really the whole gamut of what I would call psychiatric practice. Where do you sit on that? And what would you do as a senator in relation to that? Well,
look, let's go back to systems again. If you look at one of the videos I put together, John, I shared with people the 2-box model of the immune system, which is what is still used today. You know, you have the innate and the adaptive. That's how vaccines were created and then still used. First of all, we need to recognize that that entire basis of the science is flawed. I was honored to give the lecture at the National Science Foundation 4 months ago in November on a new view of the immune system, which involves 6 boxes. And the reason I'm bringing this up is not just the innate box and the adaptive box. It includes the interferon. It includes our gut microbiome, which is where digestion takes place. All those, not only in the gut, but everywhere. The microbiome and the virome. We have 380 trillion viruses. The reason I bring this up is there's a couple of other components. The gut-brain axis. The gut is connected to our brain. So if your gut is screwed up, you're going to have neuroinflammation in the brain. So if we want to talk about mental issues, let's start with the gut. That's where issues begin. When you disturb the gut bacteria, you perturb the brain. So
bacteria in the gut are very, very important.
Yes. One of my friends who's a gastroenterologist, this is a fact. Your first brain is your gut. Your second brain is up here. You know, people say, I have a gut instinct. Well, people should listen to that. You literally have 2 brains, and they're connected through the gut-brain axis. So as what happens below affects above, and what happens above affects the gut. But fundamentally, if people want to start, the neurologists and the neuroendocrinologists are now recognizing that you have to go to the gastroenterologist, okay? And we have to understand the microbiome. So many years ago, about 2 years ago, a family foundation approached us. They said, we're really concerned all these young people are putting on Adderall and Ritalin and all these drugs. In fact, about 10, 15 years ago, I dated a woman who was at Harvard Law School. And she said, Shiva, do you know 50 to 60% of my classmates are on Ritalin and Adderall? Okay. These are the future senators. Okay. So you have people who, and I remember I went to the Christmas event there, which is a theater show that they do there where all the Harvard Law School students do a show. And it was interesting. I said, is anyone taping this? She said, no one's taping this. All of these people here want to become a senator or congressman. The reason I'm saying that, these people already see their trajectory, and 60% of them are on Ritalin or Adderall. It's assumed that's like what you do to stay awake and be focused, etc. So anyway, this family foundation wanted us to fund that because they really wanted us to support brain health. So what we did, John, was we used Cytosolve. We went through, I think, about 150 supplements that were written about in the natural products literature. And we found around 12 supplements that had amazing effects through combination, because our engine can find that for short-term memory, long-term memory, and cognition. Nothing to do with any of these drugs. And these are things that occur in natural compounds. But one of them that in psychiatry, that psychiatrists, if they're listening, is, first of all, the cleaning of the gut, supporting the gut microbiome. That's one of the first things that supports brain function. But the other thing is there are herbs like rhodiola, which have been extremely well researched, that can eliminate the need for many of these, horrible pharmaceutical drugs. In fact, I met 2 Harvard Medical School, where I live here. Interestingly enough, McLean's, the institute is here, which is considered one of the leading institutes for psychiatric research. And these 2 husband and wife team left that. They said, what we're doing to people is horrible, because it's under the assumption of who is defining what crazy is, right? Someone is, first of all, deciding that. And then the way we're approaching that is through these very, very harsh chemicals, which have never really been tested. And we're entering a whole new world when there's been a whole nother world that's existed for thousands of years, where people knew diet, when you, particularly with detoxification, when you support the gut microbiome, you can have enormous improvement for people mentally. So
I'm so pleased you say that, because for many years, my wife and I have been working with a group called the Citizens Commission on Human Rights. Somebody can maybe post the link in the comments. And to me, there is no doubt at all that psychiatry and how it's practiced today, perhaps in the beginning, a very, very long time ago, the people who wanted to, practice psychiatry had good intentions. And I'm not saying that every psychiatrist is a bad person or evil, but certainly, they are educated to, they're just prescribing pills. And these pills are very, very destructive. And Ritalin, for instance, I think it's a form of amphetamine or something. I'm not a biochemist.
Well, Adderall is, yeah. I mean, my nephew, who went to elementary school here, he said nearly 50% of this was a 13, 14-year-old kid. The kids were on Ritalin, and people prescribe it like, it's a normal thing. It's incredible. But one of the, I'll tell you, B6, vitamin B6, I have friends who all went to these sites. They had some problem. A B6 deficiency, can cause some significant problems in brain function. Just B6. Yes. I've seen so many people.
Right.
What's that?
100% correct. 100%.
B6 deficiency. And remember, the history of medicine has always been to pin the problem on some virus and propose some pharmaceutical drug. Pellagra, which was all the eczema and all this that used to occur, horrible. It was said, that was brought in by Italian immigrants. They were quarantining people, until a very good doctor noticed that he went to an asylum, and he noticed that the doctors and the nurses were fine because it was an infectious disease. And the farmers had it because all they were eating was corn, which had essentially no niacin in it. Okay. So one little vitamin. And then
it has some amazing therapeutic effects, and we've researched
incredible effects. Niacin has incredible effects, and that's why people who take it, they get a detoxification. They see massive improvement. But the B vitamins have phenomenal effect. But B6 for mental health. I mean, I'm not a doctor here. I am a systems guy, but I can tell you from a systems perspective, B6, what I've witnessed at the molecular systems level, the pathways that it has enormous effect that I've seen more than any of these drugs do, and very little side effects.
Clear, so you're not speaking as a medical doctor, you're speaking as a systems expert.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. What is a medical doctor? Let's talk about that. If you go through 2 years of medical school in the United States, you slog it out, you learn all these courses, you learn first of all, you don't learn any nutrition. There's not one nutrition course that's mandated, which is incredible. Okay. Now you go through those 2 years, and then you go through another 2 years of hell and clinicals and all this. And then you're basically treated like dirt. You probably are not healthy at the end of that process. Now, surgeons and anesthesiologists, in my opinion, actually solve problems. But the typical unfortunate victimization that takes place to most MDs, it's a big pharma educational model. If this, then this. If this, then this. So the typical MD doesn't learn a systems approach to the body. And the reason for that, John, is if you look at the history of Western medicine, it actually came from wartime medicine. It was about putting a soldier back on the field. That's where it came from. That it wasn't about prevention, and it did some many good things for that. If you, God forbid, got into a major accident, something happened and you needed surgery, extraordinary tools. But the MD is essentially trained to see everything as a nail and fundamentally everything as a hammer, which is two solutions. Look at the physician's desk reference, which is the drug, and then which is the medical intervention. And even now, with all the healthcare nonsense that's taken place, the MD's hands are even more tied. So the notion of understanding the body as a system is not even there in our repertoire. That's why when I came up with systems health, we've had so many doctors go through this. By the way, when we did the Fire Fauci petition, I was shocked to see nearly, I think we're close to 80, 90,000 people who've signed it, and nearly 3,000
oracles in fake news Fauci.
Yeah.
So you've got an ally there. And
about nearly 3,000 doctors signed that, John. 3,000 MDs. So
I mean, you have done so much. And I also just saw another comment from the Duke of Marlborough. He said, we've got to walk this man into the White House. So basically, you have an ally there. And as I think I explained, His Grace is very close with the US president. So that is very, very positive. Now, if I could just summarize. So basically, I think the real genius sort of bolt from the blue idea is the public retaking ownership of the postal system in order to create an independent, because the postal system was always the
independent
right
of, and it was the public commons. It was our commons. Yes.
I think, you see, as a student of sovereignty, as somebody who has fought for the sovereign rights of every man, woman, and child in the world, sovereignty is the key. Now, what is very, very interesting is that in this country, we have the Royal Mail, which is being used less and less and less now. But it is actually the Royal Mail's right to carry the communication of.
That's what they were supposed to do. The postal service was supposed to be communications. You know, it's like everything. Whenever, by the way, the reason I wanted to, if you guys, it's not to sell a book. If you guys, there's a couple of good chapters. There's a couple of good chapters in the Future of Email where I talk about this, the importance of what is email. And the importance of the haves and the have-nots, because the new haves and the have-nots are people who have privacy and others who don't. Now, it has to be legislated that, remember, no one can interfere with postal mail. 20-year sentence prison, even the postal.
They caught, didn't they? Because they caught somebody. Just, was it Capone they brought down on that?
Mail fraud. Yeah, it was mail fraud.
They did.
Right. Yeah. So the postal mail is reclaiming our public commons, but it can be done in two ways: through software. And, you know, we have so many of these postal mail offices, they all could put up what's called a very simple antenna, and they could create what's called a mesh network. I don't want to get too detailed, but this is different than AT&T and Vodafone. That is a network of the people, by the people. Now you give people choice. Look, you want to use FedEx and DHL and, you know, or you could use the public mail system, which is our communications infrastructure. And no one can interfere. It's ours.
You see, and what's very interesting is in this country, local post offices, like, for instance, in the little village of Tintagel, which is in Cornwall, we're about 4 hours away from London here. In Camelot Castle sits in the lovely village of Tintagel. We had a local post office here, which has been closed down, and it's actually very important to the community. So I think we should be fighting for these postal systems. These are, I think you've put your finger on something.
They were a
very simple little idea, but I think it's genius.
It's when I initially tell it to people, people think, what is he talking about? The postal mail, their print mail. And then it's like, wait a minute. The founders of these, I think the founders of the United States, these people were, remember, they were children of the Enlightenment. They were educated in science and engineering, so they could see 300 years ahead. I mean, there's an interesting thing, John, I wrote when I was, I think, a 15-year-old kid, when I submitted my email thing for some contest to win an award. And it was very interesting because I said, you know, email will one day become bigger than the light bulb. I wrote it very eloquently, and I was looking at it. But the reason I'm saying that is when you are in the throes of actually doing something, you have a prescience. And lawyers and lobbyists and these people don't have that. So I can tell you that the founders of the United States, when they created the Postal Service, they had that prescience to see far into the future. They couldn't have seen the internet, but they knew that the Postal Service was supposed to be an infrastructure where everyone is the press. It's not New York Times is the press. That was never the definition of the press. The press where all 7.2 billion people are the press.
Yes. Well, this is what I keep telling our followers. You see, we are the citizen journalists. And
exactly.
What we use tonight is citizen scientists. So now everybody in this group is promoted They're now a scientist because you can look and you can observe, and everybody's free to apply scientific method, which is basically, the right to observe for yourself, the right to think for yourself. That scientific research should be open source, is basically what you're saying.
Exactly.
Take us to the, what was your paradigm again? Freedom.
Truth, freedom, health.
Truth, freedom, health.
Without freedom, you can't. What's that
triangle of truth, freedom, and health?
And they're interconnected, right? Because without truth, we can't find real problems and real solutions. We're going to come fake problems and fake solutions. So and when we have health, we can fight for freedom. You need strong people. You need warriors. But if everyone's on,
there's a few warriors on here, and we're going to introduce you to a lot more warriors. And I'm sure this will be shared by everybody on the feed, to all of their friends and so on and so forth. I think that's fascinating what you've said about psychiatry. I have been battling these idiots for a long time. Now,
what we can do, John, is with this technology I've created, we actually have the ability to show at the molecular systems level how these drugs actually hurt people and how nutrients can help people. In the United States, a very interesting
how psychiatric drugs harm them. You can actually demonstrate that.
We can show that at the molecular. Remember, I go down to the molecular level. What's powerful about
that now? Because there's a lot of people here about that.
What's powerful about cytosol? It's a weapon for truth, because what we're able to do is go down to the molecular systems level. Let me give you, in the United States, in the 11th Circuit Court ruling, if you create a supplement or you say, hey, I think this is good for this. Well, pharma companies, if they have a drug, they have to go through the FDA process. But if I say, hey, I think turmeric is really good for anti-inflammatory. Hey, I think turmeric can do this well. They'll say, no, you can't do that. And they have a different organization called the Federal Trade Commission. They say, no, you have to prove this and you have to prove this. They put these massive stringencies on you. However, in a court ruling 3 years ago, in the 11th Circuit Court said, if you can show mechanistically how that particular ingredient works down at the mechanistic level, you can then argue that you can make claims. And that's why the discovery or the invention of cytosol is powerful, because I can go down to the molecular level and say, when you take this, this occurs, and then this occurs, and then this occurs, and then this occurs at the mechanistic level. And we build these dossiers that become very powerful tools for defending the use of these things. And they can't attack it back because it's based on, remember, aggregating all those thousands of little pieces of Lego blocks, which we have in a repository. So we're essentially using science, but integrating and amalgamating it to show why things are true. So in many ways, I feel very fortunate. The capabilities of cytosol, I'd like to give cytosol away to the world and allow us to literally mine all the amazing richness of natural compounds and be using that to validate, to go against these forces of big pharma. Systems health is a powerful way to educate masses of people, so they don't need to go to MIT in many ways. They can learn it in the comfort of their own, room. And kids should learn this, how the body is a system. And these are principles they can use in any part of life.
Before he died, my late father had a very similar idea in relation to education. And I was blessed to have gone to Winchester College, which is one of the great British schools. I can't claim to be the best student there, but my father was a very keen educationalist, and he always felt that the power of the internet could be used to leverage how one could home educate people and make it available to everybody in Africa, everybody across the world. This was his dream, really. He left us a few years ago.
I see.
What you're saying is a beautiful, beautiful concept. Now, in relation to the British, we feel that our government over here is not really handling the situation in relation to the virus. In fact, they're doing a worse job than they are in the United States. I think President Trump is actually doing a pretty good job, personally. Have you had a chance to look at what's going on over here, or do you have a view on that? I don't want to ask you to speak about something that you don't understand, but have you taken a look over here at the UK, or?
Well, I just looked broadly at the numbers, I know you have the NHS system there.
Mm.
And I also know, when I was looking broadly, I did some work many years ago with Imperial College. We had some colleagues there. And I've done some work with King's College, on the biological side. But at a broad level, I know that the NHS system is a bureaucratized form of healthcare, similar to what we have, that's becoming in the United States.
So it's basically top down.
It's a top-down model of medicine, and so that's those features. And I think it's in some ways it's existed in its own form longer. And if you look at Italy, you don't want to go to it. You don't want to ever end up in an Italian hospital. My friends have said, so it's separate from what's going on coronavirus. But I can't speak to all the understanding I have, like with the GPOs and the PBMs and all that in the U.S. healthcare system. I'd love to learn, but I can probably tell you that the central feature is probably, the top-down model of healthcare. And I think the more we can move it to decentralizing it, where we move it to the doctor-patient relationship again, empower the doctor. In this entire model, the doctors are, as I understand, be it in Britain or here, is essentially disempowered. So people go to medical school with very, very good interest and want to help, but they're essentially, in some ways, becoming robots on what they can do and what they can't do. So I think relative to the coronavirus, I would like to know, and Boris Johnson went in. Do you know what happened to him, how he got out?
Well, that's what we're trying to find out, because he came out pretty quickly, and I feel that he may have been given the hydroxy protocol. Mm-hmm. Maybe he was given high-dose vitamin C. Who knows, Dr. Shiva? Maybe you called him, because I know that the president did call and was very keen to make sure that he got the very best of what is working. What has been upsetting me is the degree to which the left-wing media in America and here have been suppressing the idea of really effective cures. And in fact, my dear wife, Irina, who I will put on camera because she's a lot prettier than I am, she was speaking to one of the top surgeons in London, and he was completely unaware that, hydroxychloroquine, and the potentials and so on and so forth. He's a cardiologist. He's one of the top ones in London. So I think you may be, in fact, saying, what was your observation with that? Is he just was unaware of it?
He was unaware, and then I sent him some research papers, and he researched it, and he confirmed that it's a very good protocol, and he would prescribe it to his patients if they needed that. And but he basically confirmed that our hospitals are not using it in the UK. There's maybe 1 or 2 hospitals trying it, but people are dying. They can't go on the ventilators because their lungs are too weak, and they're basically allowed to die. And they're not even using it as experimental medicine, which is extremely disappointing. This is UK. And to hear this from the doctors on the ground was really upsetting.
I mean, when you look at that, I mean, one of the videos I'll talk about, I did on hydroxychloroquine. The way it works is, it's good to take it with zinc, by the way. But when a virus lands on the cell, the coronavirus, it lands on a receptor called the ACE2 receptor, and it has to lock into that, and a process called glycosylation takes place, and that's what enables the virus to get into the cell. And then once it gets in, it takes over the cell machinery, and it does 3 things. It has to replicate its RNA, then it has to reassemble itself, and then it has to transport. Where hydroxychloroquine stops it at the receptor level. It inhibits glycosylation. So it inhibits the virus from getting in. It also inhibits the virus replication, all those processes. It's good to take it with zinc. It does have side effects. Interesting enough, when you take vitamin D is an antimicrobial. Vitamin C, stops the virus replication in a similar way. And then vitamin A really gives you the protective sheath. So, but relative to what they're talking about, hydroxychloroquine, which I, laid out what the side effects are, but it's far better to do than do nothing. And it's particularly useful from the systems analysis we've done when you use it as, sort of as a prophylactic. But when people get into those late stages and they're in crisis, it's really unfortunate that they're not doing the IV vitamin C. And if you layer in the high dose vitamin D and A, it basically knocks out viruses. This is why the sun is such a powerful vehicle, because the sun produces UVB radiation. And it'd be really interesting to know. Thank you, James. Very sweet of you.
It's great. Barbara thinks you're a genius. So there we go.
It'd be very interesting to know who are the people dying, because one thing is, when you get the UV radiation from the sun, the vitamin D gets created, and so think about vitamin D like a gun, like a musket. And the vitamin D creates a molecule called cathelicidins, which, by the way, unfortunately meant most of the MDs did not get in their training, which is sad. But those cathelicidins are literally like spears, okay, that destroy the walls of the bacteria or the virus. So that's why sunshine is so important. And if you can't get it in the winter months, and if you didn't store it up by being out in the sun during the summer months, you better take that vitamin D, because it's really an antimicrobial activity. And this has been shown over and over and over again. So that's why I think it's really, it almost seems like to me, you want to, to getting to the problem here, their model is not truth, freedom, and health. It's fear, fiction, and disease, right? It's fear, fiction. You want to use fear, so you want to get that numerator very high. You want to get a lot of fatalities, and you want death. You want the fear. And I think that's what's taking place here, because it behooves, it doesn't make any sense. Well, we're not doing vitamin C, when we're not doing vitamin A, D, and using whatever we know, hydroxychloroquine and zinc.
Well, in the country, it seems they're doing nothing at all.
Right. That's unfortunate.
It's unbelievable, really. Unbelievable. Yeah. Dr. Shiva, I do hope you get into the Senate, and I do hope the president adopts your plan, because it is genius and it is so common sense and resonates with us all. And I just hope it does go through.
Well, it's all what we do. What we do now, I can tell you on the ground here, so many mothers are supporting our campaign. People, look, there's two parties in the United States like you have there, but these parties don't matter anymore. President Trump ran as a Republican, but he was President Trump before he was a Republican or a Democrat. In Massachusetts, Massachusetts was a revolution took place. Tomorrow, interesting enough, is April 19th when the first shot was fired, and hopefully none of the British will keep it against the Americans, but first shot.
Getting rid of our lot, to be honest.
What's that?
I think you did a good thing getting rid of our lot, to be fair.
Right. But what's interesting is Massachusetts is very interesting, because when the revolution ended, in many ways, the people who lost actually embedded themselves in here deeper. In many ways, Massachusetts is the center of the deep state. It is both the Democrats and Republicans. So the GOP establishment really doesn't like me that much, just like they didn't like the president when he ran. Right. So I'm running as a Republican because I will get on the ballot, but the GOP establishment will be my greater enemy than even my enemies, the Democrats.
Isn't that
so? That's why it'd be very important.
Because they're so in bed with big pharma, probably, or
they're in bed with big pharma. They're in bed with big academia. They want to control the narrative. They do not. More importantly, John or Irina, they do not want outsiders. They want the same old monolithic, one-size-fit-all structure. That's why, to me, winning in Massachusetts will be a win for truth, freedom, and health everywhere. Because I could argue that pretty much most of the people, you could probably trace every economic collapse to some professor at Harvard, okay? The bottom line is that
Keynes was a complete maniac.
What's that?
Maynard Keynes, that economist.
Yes. So if you look at Keynes in economics, it basically says print money all day, right? That money doesn't have to be attached to anything real. So that is what the fundamental thing is. It is a system where you support the parasite versus the producer.
Yes, I love it.
I love that. Explain that, parasite versus producer.
Hey, Michelle?
Yes.
Honey, could you just turn on the light there just a little bit? Because it's getting a little bit dark. Is it getting a little bit dark? Are we okay?
Go on. It's probably nighttime then.
What's that? Over there, that light over there. No. Yeah.
We can see you well.
Okay.
And we have really...
Yes, that's good, Michelle. So what's happening is that, look, there was a point in time where what you did, the work you did, was literally connected to the value that was created, right?
Right.
So there was a direct connection. when we separate that connection, which means we separate someone's work from what they're actually doing at a spiritual level, in many ways it's dehumanizing, right? So you as an individual, you want to create something, a company or a piece of art or whatever it is, and you want your soul gets put into that. That's ultimately the aspect of being a human being. Now, when you separate that, where you force people, Adam Smith talked about this in the middle of even Wealth of Nations, the dehumanizing nature that those assembly lines could cause. In many ways, Marx talked about it in a different way, right? But they both, and from a liberal philosophy, they both address the problem of the dehumanization of the individual when you force someone to do something that has nothing to do with their connection to labor. That's one aspect. The other part of it is when a person creates value, that value you separate by inflation, by creating something that disintermediates that, a currency, and then you inflate that currency. And that's what the United States allowed the Federal Reserve to do with quantitative easing, that the Federal Reserve could further create this distance from the individual and what is being created. And the more we create the distance, which is what that kind of economic policy does, the more it's basically bondage of the human being.
It is.
So when I did that first tweet, John, I said, as an MIT PhD in biological engineering, the first thing that really started all this, I see in someone who studies the immune system, what I see is this will go down in history as one of the biggest fear-mongering hoax aimed to destroy economies, aimed to suppress dissent, and aimed to create mandated medicine. So I don't know where those words came from. I wrote them out, but I tell you, it says it all. That's what this is about. We're witnessing a big ad campaign, which is to achieve all those three things. And the only way out of this is through a single word, courage. And, there's a great book I have in my bookshelf, Robert Clive. He was the guy who became the Emperor of India, took over India, but he's a very interesting character. If you look at his history, he was a bookkeeper, I think, in the British East India Company, but he ends up becoming the Emperor of India through just these bold acts of courage. I mean, it's a very interesting life, but I think the confounding variable that those in power can never model in any mathematical program, anytime they try to do it, is courage. And what we need to do is, when you talk about Massachusetts, last time I ran against a fake Indian, Elizabeth Warren, we ran a campaign, only the real Indian can defeat the fake Indian.
I know it's fake. She's 124th Indian.
Yeah, I'm the one who sent her the first DNA test kit, and she foolishly returned it. It went viral, and I sent her multiple DNA test kits. President Trump may have started Pocahontas, but we had posters all over here. We forced her to take that DNA test kit. But this time, I want to win, because that time was just learning, like you're a rookie, but I know the path to victory. It's about focusing on this thing that's resonating, truth, freedom, and health. My main enemy is not the Democrat establishment. It's my own GOP establishment. That's why the president hearing this.
They're in bed with Big Pharma, and they're in big with medicine, and they're in big with the vaccines, and they're in bed. There are more pharmaceutical lobbyists in Washington than there are congressmen. And when we were over, I was invited to Washington for the Kavanaugh trial, because that was a big moment, when there was the Kavanaugh vote and for the hearing. And I was astounded by the level of corruption, the pay to play. And I really understand what the president is up to. But you know what? You are in bed with the people. The people love you. And the one thing that we use a particular piece of technology here to basically measure mean velocity. Your mean velocity is out the roof. People love you. And the other thing is, my favorite Indian god is Ganesh, who, of course, is god of obstacles.
He removes obstacles.
He removes obstacles, and he rides on the back of a bandicoot, apparently.
Right.
Which is a type of a sort of mammal.
Yeah, little rat. Yeah.
He can get through any obstacles. So may the divine power of Ganesh help us all bring your campaign to fruition, because I don't think your campaign is just about Massachusetts.
No, it isn't. It's gone beyond that.
Tiny little. I mean, listen, it's important that you win that Massachusetts, but what you've found there is the epicenter of medical and psychiatric insanity.
Exactly.
Sort of authoritarian, top-down bullshit, for want of another word.
Exactly. I think you said it. You nailed it, John.
That's what Massachusetts, you've chosen the epicenter. And you know what? If you want to take down the beast, you got to go for the heart. You got to take a heart shot.
Yeah.
And you've got the beast in your crosshairs. And we would like to help you get the ammunition that you need. And you know what? Keep firing. You know, even if that beast goes down, it's not Queensberry rules now. You know, you've got to keep punching, and you've got to keep communicating. And you know, I'm sure we're going to get a lot of feedback from this interview. I know that His Grace the Duke of Marlborough and I would love to welcome you here in England when we're released from our slavery. You know. And,
well, I'd love to come there and see you all. Thank you.
There's a wonderful place near here where they decided to abolish slavery, and it was that, you know, Britain, of course, began.
Yeah, Britain did it before the United States
with Wilberforce and Lord Grenville, and in fact, His Grace and I stayed there the other day together. As a lovely home just near here. So we are all about the vanquishing of slavery. And tonight, I can tell you, because I'm watching the comments here, you've been doing a lot of the talking, I've been seeing some of the comments. You have created friends and allies, the likes of which you cannot even begin to imagine. And I will definitely keep in touch with you. I know how busy you are, but actually I think this is quite a positive platform for you to lay out comfortably your ideas. I hope you haven't felt we've rushed you in any way.
No, thank you. This has been wonderful. I appreciate all the warmth and the grace, and to the Duke, thank you very much. You know, one of the interesting things, John, you talked about sort of some sense of divinity here. You know, I didn't know about MIT. It's interesting. And I'll sort of end with this, because that's why I think I don't understand how all of this works fully, but I do know that all of this is part of something that's quite profound. Because, you know, I went to this high school, you know, in Livingston, New Jersey, which was one of the best high schools. I graduated top of the class, but no one in my high school told me about MIT. Very interesting. So I was just, you know, and I had done so much. I actually wanted to do carpentry and do design, but I was the #1 student, had won every award. And interesting enough, my dear mom, who's an amazing woman, and my mom died, interesting enough, in the Indian calendar. And she never, you know, went to temple or church, but she was a profoundly spiritual woman. Everything, her actions always matched her deeds. And she died of a horrible disease called pulmonary fibrosis. But my mom was so kind. So when I was in high school, you know, I had 2 weeks left to apply for schools. And my mom had helped these 2 women who she met at some random shopping market. One of them who was getting, 2 Indian women. And, you know, in the Indian culture, you're not supposed to get divorced. And one of the women was thrown out of the home by her husband.
Either.
What's that?
You're not supposed to in England either.
Yeah. So this woman didn't have a place to stay. And my mom felt very bad for her. She said, look, we have a small bedroom in our basement. You could stay there, you and your friend. So they stayed there. So interesting enough, 2 weeks before I had to submit my applications, her friend comes and says, you should apply to this place called the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I didn't even know what it was, you know, and he showed me the booklet, and it was this dome. I said, this looks like a mental institute. Okay. So I didn't want to have anything to do with it. So then I think 2 days before the application was due, he came and he wouldn't leave. So I took a pencil and I applied and I got accepted. Okay. So first of all, that event should never have occurred, right? A random incident, a random guy shows up at our home, has me apply. I never knew about it. And then my high school got very interested that I got accepted because they get kudos, they get points. So then I arrive at MIT with my mom. You know, they did where you go to visit. And I saw the most unhealthiest people I'd ever seen in my life. Okay. People who looked like they were 80 years old, you know, hunched over. And I was an athlete. I played. I was into health. And I said, this place is crazy. I'm not going to go here. Right. So then my physics teacher says, you should go there. And she convinced me because, you know, the school gets points, you know, ratings. But then she said, Shiva, the reason you should go there is because Boston is considered the Athens of the world. And I said, that was interesting. But the point is, I didn't know that. Think about that. My mom meets some guy at a shopping mall, people come, and that's how I ended up here. So I am convinced, you know what I'm saying? It's something quite profound. And then when I came to MIT, what did I do? I had enough courses to graduate in 2 years, but I was more interested in systems. And I ended up starting a radical newspaper. I didn't like either party. One of my original mentors I studied with was someone like Noam Chomsky. Chomsky was very much into linguistics, and he, I understood the caste system. I had differences with him later on, but it was about trying to understand how political systems work. That's what I did. The academic stuff was interesting, but in many ways, coming here to our point, this was sort of the center of the belly of the beast. And I was given an opportunity to understand the workings of that beast and also its weaknesses. So I think we have a significant opportunity, because I think Massachusetts, in some ways, it's where, it was a touching point of East and West, right? In many ways. East India Company was here. East India Company was in India. It's a very interesting, there's an interesting energy here.
There is.
Quite a few of our viewers are asking, what would you like them to do now in order to help you and achieve your goals?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important things is, I believe in the concept of visualization and divine spirit, for people to visualize our winning truth, freedom, and health. I could ask you for money and all that. That's secondary, but I believe in this thing of a vision that people have. So the vision of this golden age, where we start to see a world where more and more people are creators, more and more people are innovators. It's not limited to the few. So we see a growth in science that's never occurred before, coming from the edges, not from the center. Now, as a part of that, on the tactical thing, people should go and contribute, or know people contribute as much as you can to our campaign that people can, because we want to have a war chest, not only to win here, but to spread this message of truth, freedom, and health everywhere. And the third part is to share the content. And obviously, like you're doing, John, make connections with people who can really get this message exploding much faster even than it's moving, essentially increase the acceleration. Those are the three things people can do, essentially share. And I encourage everyone to go learn, tell everyone to go learn how the body is a system. I've created the tools. We used to make a huge business charging a ton of it, but I've made it so affordable. And if people can't afford it, what I've said is we'll give people scholarships to learn it on systems health. So it's basically sharing this knowledge everywhere.
Yeah, so we have a large group on here that are concerned about the 5G. Now, if your methodology is applied to, let's say, the subject of 5G, which all we can really say at the moment is we don't really know what it does. It probably does do something negative, but I don't think anybody could prove one way or the other that it's bad or it's good or whatever, but we don't know. But your system, by collecting the data in an open source way, we can find out and put all the pieces together, is what you're saying.
I'm saying we can give, look, I did this many years ago during the genetic engineering and the GMO debate. There's a huge debate whether GMOs are good or bad. On the front page of MIT was, buy fresh, buy GMOs. And I said, this is really weird. It looks like an ad for Monsanto. So I used our technology, John. I went through 6,000 papers that were written about a metabolic pathway in plants called C1 metabolism. And I took all those pathways, we integrated it using cytosolve. And then we found out, and we published a couple of papers on that. And then we said, what happens when genetic engineering takes place on soy? By the way, 90%, 95%, 98, 97% of the soy in the United States is genetically engineered. And what we found was that when genetic engineering takes place, the plant, which by the way, in the normal case, plants create formaldehyde, which is a carcinogen during the metabolic process, and then they get rid of it using glutathione. Everyone listening probably knows glutathione is an amazing antioxidant. It's probably another part of the help supporting the immune system. So plants create formaldehyde, but they get rid of it in the natural cycle. What we found out was genetic engineering takes place. A plant actually accumulates formaldehyde. because his glutathione levels are dropped. I published that in a series of 4 papers. Then people said, oh, this is just a mathematical model. This is just a framework. Then we found, in fact, a group in Leeds in the United Kingdom who had actually grown the soy plant, and they also saw 250% less glutathione, which is what we predicted. The reason I'm saying that is, with this capability, I could build a theoretical framework, and not lowercase t, uppercase t, like the theory of relativity. And then that could be a framework which could explain why, and then we could validate it with experimentation, John. So we have the ability to go bottoms up, collect the systems approach, and then propose why this could be taking place. In my view, it's a function of that we're actually an electromagnetic body, and I have a systems approach to that, and how these electromagnetic waves perturb that process. And that gives a framework to build like an operating system to understand the why. And I think when we approach it from that, we have a theoretical framework. Otherwise, it's people, just shooting stuff in the dark. And that's how we gave the GMO movement a very much different argument than just saying, it's just genetic engineering is bad. And that's the same thing we can do here.
So, I mean, really, your capacity to deliver this systems approach to life is actually going to change the way government occurs. It's going to change the way the medical community operates. It's actually completely unmocking the current operating system, if you like, and putting in a much fairer, more truthful way of life existing.
Yep, exactly. It's a systems approach.
Which is fantastic. Well, I know I speak for everybody here. His Grace the Duke of Marlborough is got a final message for you. He says, God bless you all tonight. Thank you. And he said he's going to speak to the London ambassador and to the President of the United States about this conversation. And so your message will get through. His Grace could not be a more eloquent ambassador for what we're trying to do. And of course, they are close friends, which is great. So I can't thank you enough for coming on this evening.
You've been very generous with your time.
You've been incredibly generous with your time.
Thank you for hosting this, and my many blessings to the Duke and for his very, very lovely and kind and gracious comments. Thank you. And thank you to all of you for all the activity and taking time to come out today.
Well, we will welcome you in person at Camelot, and consider yourself a knight of the round table. And, all right.
I always wanted to be that. Okay.
We don't need me to tell you that. You are innately noble anyway. But it has been an absolute pleasure. May God bless you, and may God bless your family, and may God bless your ancestors. Because the story of your spiritual bloodline and your grandmother and your great-grandparents and what they went through to allow you to exist here today. When you told me the story of your grandfather toiling in the fields with his muscles and his zest for life at a very elderly age, this is we have a great debt to your ancestors. And each and every step on their path has led you to where you are today. And I'm sure that you are going to help lift this entire planet, and we will experience the golden age. And I love your idea of us all visualizing that now. Yes. It is an absolute honor to meet you, and thank you so much.
And we will support you and have you continue supporting you. You gained a lot of medical doctors on this broadcast, thanks to Dr. Neputi, and thank you very much, and God bless you for everything you're doing.
Thank you. God bless you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We'll say good night. Thank you.
Be well.
Thank you, Dr. Shiva.
Thanks, everyone. Be well, John.
Well, wow. What can I say? That was really something very special.
2 hours, 15 minutes.
Well, a shorter podcast than usual. I will say goodbye. I will call you back in a little while, but do feel free to stay on. I will just mute your mic there, Dr. Shiva. I just wanted to show
Thank
one
you.
other little thing here, which I did find. And a lot of you have been asking about Blenheim and sort of wanting to know about it. But I thought I would just give you a little view of it. And I'm going to show it in the stream. I found this on the internet, and it just shows Blenheim in the spring. And it is rather lovely. And I hope it is going to play. Well, hang on one second. There we go. That is a little bit of a glimpse for you of His Grace's home, and you know, the very, very special and sacred energy that obviously is part of what we're trying to do here at Camelot Castle, is to bring together some of the great icons and energies of the ages, not just of the current age, and to combine those in order to create a golden age. Now, there was one other little thing that I wanted to share with you this evening, and I thought we'd end on a spiritual note. And this was actually sent to me by Charlie Kirk's girlfriend this afternoon. And it's a little known story that during the election campaign, Irina, Ted, and myself actually visited the birthplace of Donald Trump's mother. We visited the birthplace of Donald Trump's mother. And I was sent this, and I did not know this before. So I'm going to share this with you, and I've got to get it in the stream here. So here we go. And this is a story, funnily enough, about Donald Trump's Bible that he keeps in the Oval Office. And it's a very, very special story. So without further ado, I'm going to put myself there in the screen. And here is the story of Donald's Bible.
There was a great revival in the Hebrides in the early 1900s. Began to moved up to the pleading for it into the 40s. Maybe we could say it topped out in the early 50s. Two old women, one was 84 years old and one was 82 years old. One was blind and one was humped over so badly with spinal stenosis, just arched over. But they had passion for revival. They wanted God to work. This is what happened. They couldn't even get out to the church to pray. They couldn't even get out to the church to worship. Their house became a place to meet. People came in. They got so passionate about revival coming to their isle, the Isle of Lewis. They got so passionate about it. They confronted the preacher and wanted to know if he was thoroughly right with God. And they prayed and prayed and prayed. And they'd seen the Lord, they said, with the church filled up. And God blessing, a great overflow. And the fire of God struck that tiny little obscure place off the coast of Scotland. And when it happened, there was a young teenage boy that got saved in it. His name was Donald. And the preacher became so dependent upon Donald and so close to Donald, he would ask him to lead in public prayers and help him with the meetings, and he did. Oh, how God worked. People began to hear about it, and the revival fire spread. It spread. And God blessed in a great way. Those two old women, the people, kind of people don't want in the church anymore. And from that same island, there was a young girl who was a cousin to Donald Smith, who immigrated to America. Her name was Marianne Smith McLeod. She came to America in 1936. She met a man named Fred, and they were married. They fell in love. They were married. God bless in a great way. And those old women were her aunts. And they came out of that fiery revival, They really experienced revival. And they sent a Bible, a copy of the Word of God that had been used in a special way in that revival, to Marianne. She started having children. I think it was 1937, she had her first child. They named him after his father, Fred. Then she had her second child, named after herself, Marianne. Then she had her third child, Elizabeth. Then she had her fourth child. And she was so impacted by this teenage boy God had used in that revival of the Hebrides. She named him Donald. And she gave him that Bible, the Hebrides Revival Bible. He was born in 1946. He's now the 45th President of the United States. And that revival Bible is in the Oval Office. I'm saying to you, I don't know how, why, I don't know how it all comes together. But I believe God is putting some things together to give us just a window. If he could find some open people who know what the wind is for. Can this be the time the wind is open? Providentially, God has prepared the moment, and we will become the people of prayer, pleading with God. This is a plea. Will thou not revive us again? Will you be a part of that? Will you?
Amen.
So, amen to that. That was
very moving.
Very moving indeed. And thank you so much. Well, we've been, hang on, sorry.
That was a great revival.
There we go. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm going to ask Ted, in his ministerial capacity, to offer the final prayer this evening and the final blessings for the guests. And that would be great.
Where's the window? Is it directly ahead?
It's directly ahead where the little green light is, Ted.
My friends, good evening. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm sure on your behalf, I could also say thank you very much to Dr. Shiva and John and Arena. Amazing evening we've had. With all the excitement that's been going on and all the positivity, I'd just like us all to, metaphorically speaking, join hands together and say a very quick prayer to Almighty God and Father and ask him to please watch over and guide our leaders, especially President Trump, especially our Prime Minister, the Duke of Marlborough, John and Arena, and all your families. And in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, amen. Thank you.
Amen.
Did you want to say something, darling?
No, beautifully said. Thank you, Ted.
Well, thank you, Ted.
Thank you,
really
everyone.
very special. And I think everybody, you know, who has a connection to God certainly should see what we've all witnessed tonight. You know, Jesus talked about witnessing of things, and there is a great power. You know, witnesses are obviously used in the judicial system, but the spiritual power of a witness and to give witness to something has a whole other meaning. It's a very, very interesting word. His Grace has just written, "Thank you all at Camelot Castle." I'm just going to post this on the screen. Thank you all at Camelot Castle, on a visual feast for everyone. God bless you all, and thank you all again to Dr. Shiva, and thank you, Ted. Well, it's been a very special evening.
Some people say it's been the best.
Well, I think it has been the best so far. I think it's been the best so far, but you know what? We're entering a golden age now. We are entering a golden age. We have all of our algorithms that we enjoy using. We've joined hands with the Creator. We're connecting up some of the brightest minds in the world. And all I would ask you to do is just do whatever you can to help. Do whatever you can to help.
Share the knowledge. Share.
And Mike Ricketts says, "Can I hear an amen?" Absolutely, you can hear an amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mike.
Beth Franklin says it's very spiritual. There we go. Peter Vagy, who's been a great ally from Hungary. Great guy. Says this is one of the biggest 3 hours of my life.
Wow, thank you, Peter.
Maria Delegro, Second Renaissance. Well, you know, here's the thing, is that the power of Camelot Castle, the magnificence of Blenheim and its resident power there, you know, the power formula, let's just remember the power formula. We always push power in the direction of the power upon whom we depend. I'm actually going to do a little bit of a talk on the power formula so that all of you can understand the different ways that can be used. It's a very, very useful formula. Perhaps somebody could actually post it in the comments, because somebody's written here, faith with God, all things are possible. Absolutely they are. Helena writes, amen from Texas. You see, we're joining hands with people all over the world.
Some amazing people here, some new people too.
New people.
And to all the new people, we do this every night.
Now, I do apologize. A lot of you have been sending me friendship requests, and unfortunately, Facebook limits you to 5,000 friends, and I've hit the limit. So you have to follow me on Facebook, I'm afraid. Also Twitter. Take a look over the Twitter stream. We will post up that rather beautiful video about Donald's Bible. And what's so interesting is that the number of views have gone from 2,000 views just before dinner time to 150,000 views already.
Beautiful.
So it's absolutely beautiful, that video, isn't it, really? And I never knew why we took the time to visit Donald's mother's house in Tong, in the Outer Hebrides, but we did. And, you know, there's something very valuable about placing the body in locations where positive things have occurred. And one day I'll tell you the story about what happened when we visited Blenheim for the first time in many years. And, you know, certain places are very special. Camelot's one of them, Blenheim's one of them. And the little village of Tong in the Outer Hebrides is most certainly one of them. And President Trump's mother was very special. And let's say a little prayer for her right now, wherever she is. She must be. God bless her as well. So good evening. It's been lovely. It's been a short one tonight. And but I think it's been worth it.
We'll be here tomorrow.
We'll be here tomorrow. Yeah, we'll be here tomorrow. And I don't know who we've got planned tomorrow. We've got a surprise for you on Tuesday. We have one of the most exciting entrepreneurs in the UK will be joining us. I think we've worked out the streaming hitch. So Letitia says, we must remember we won Brexit and we will also win the world back. Well, Letitia, with you on the team, we definitely will. We definitely will. So let's keep expanding. Let's keep growing. And and a very good night to you all.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.